Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott, this curious and intertextual novel tracks the missing novels and notebooks of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author. In real life, Keith's materials are actually still missing, but this particular version of events attempting to retrieve the missing materials is fictional, of course. So let's get started with what happened after Keith died in Longmont, Colorado. Chapter 1, Routine Apparitions, Autumn, 2024. Keith Abbott woke up in his garage in Colorado. He always liked being in the garage because it was where he could work. Except now his garage was not his own garage. Ever since he died, the garage had become foreign territory. This didn't stop him from continuing to like his garage on 1046 Grant Street, but what flummoxed him was that he kept looking for his notebook. He could not find it. Maybe he left it at the bar. He tried to remember what had been his last entry. It might be a clue to where he had left the notebook. The people who had bought his house after the beige widow died were having an argument again. Julie and Roy had a rocky relationship. They had problems at their low-paying jobs and issues with their concerned families. And although their situations evolved from time to time, none of these changes offered a lick of resolution. Listening to Julie and Roy argue was like trying to suck menthol out of an old cigarette butt in front of a 7-Eleven. There wasn't much point. Keith decided to take a walk. He wasn't sure that he was going to stay in Longmont that afternoon. He walked down Grand Street and turned onto Main Street. As Keith headed towards the Irish bar, he noticed that he'd entered Monterey again. Whenever he was in Monterey, he found himself back in 1973. Considering that his ashes had been scattered in Monterey Bay in 2019, he wasn't surprised that he routinely appeared in the doorway of a Monterey bar called Beer Springs whenever he went for a walk. This time, though, when he entered the bar, Keith immediately recognized Gertrude Stein. She was sitting in the corner. Keith sat down at the counter next to his buddy Michael Soule. "I see Gertrude's here," he said. "You know, the funny thing is," Mike said, "I see her too." "Did you ask anyone else if they see her?" "Ethel said she showed up at 10 o'clock. The clock on the wall showed that it was now 3 in the afternoon. Keith thought it was strange that it took him hours to travel from Longmont, Colorado to Monterey, California. He had thought it would have taken him much less time to cover so much ground now that he was dead. On the other hand, perhaps it made perfect sense. Getting out of Longmont and getting anywhere else celebrating a reduction in redneck or ultra-bingo-wingo New Age culture had always been time-consuming. Monterey in 1973 was just what, one might say, the doctor ordered. "What do you think Gertrude Stein is doing in a place like this?" Mike asked. Ethel didn't say. "No. I don't suppose Gertrude would clarify the situation herself, now would she?" Keith said. "Asking Gertrude anything might complicate the matter more," Ethel said, setting down a beer in front of each of them. Ethel knew how to read people. Keith and Mike each took a sip of their beers. Ethel leaned forward. "I think it might be because John Steinbeck came in to use the phone," she said in a whisper. Keith and Mike immediately set down their beers. "When was that?" Keith asked. "Yesterday," Ethel said. "Are you sure?" Mike asked. "Which yesterday are we talking about?" "Listen, if you ask me, I don't know if eternity will ever be printed on a calendar," Ethel said. Michael's soul turned to Keith Abbott. Over Keith's left shoulder, he could see Gertrude still sitting in a corner with a glass of wine. Mike thought he might be able to see Gertrude a little clearer if he cleaned his glasses. He took them off to wipe them on his oatmeal-colored sweater. "Did you hear that Gertrude and Ernest found Sherwood Anderson?" he asked as he put his glasses back on. Gertrude had vanished. "Yeah, I heard about that," Keith said. "I even wrote about it." Well, next time she comes around, Mike said, why don't you ask her to help you find your notebook? Keith didn't say anything. He looked at the corner where Gertrude had been sitting. Then he stared at the television set that hadn't yet been turned on. You're still looking for it, aren't you? Mike said. The thing is, Mike, Keith said slowly, all my notebooks are gone. That's sad, man. All of them? Yeah. And my manuscripts. Your manuscripts? Mike yelled. Everything. Gone. If I were you, I'd call Rhino Ritz straight away. Blessing was babysitting her little brother. Their mother was filling in a shift at Long's Peak Pub and Tap House on Main Street for a sick friend. The friend said it was a real emergency this time. Emery Noel came over to keep Blessing company. Emery was Mormon. When Blessing's family moved from Boulder to Longmont, Blessing's mother immediately approved of the girls' friendship. Julie had stopped going to temple 6 months before her daughter was born. However, realizing that she was raising Blessing in another new town after the last divorce, Julie demonstrated a decided willingness to flirt a little with her former religion to reinforce some old boundaries. It seemed logical since Julie was determined to do her best with a teenage daughter, and she remembered what it was like being a teenager. As for Emery's family, the Knowles were convinced that Emery was going to convert Blessing to Mormonism. This supremely important event was expected to manifest itself around the time the girls were handed their high school diplomas. Emery and Blessing had just started 9th grade, but the Noels anticipated, in 4 years' time, that everything was going to work out fine. Spoiler alert, the adults were going to be sorely disappointed. After 5-year-old Taylor was tucked into bed, Emery and Blessing waited for Mila to arrive. Mila was 15 and a freshman at Longmont High. She dropped out to have a baby and was reluctantly restarting 9th grade. Everyone at the high school pretty much avoided Mila. Truth be told, Emery had to officially steer clear of Mila to dodge any potential damage to her own virginal reputation, but Blessing felt free enough to sit with Mila during lunch. She's driving the Camaro. Emery's blonde head swiveled from the front window back towards Blessing. I'll let her in, Blessing said, and slipped out the side door of 1046 Grant Street. Emery went into the kitchen and grabbed the jug of orange juice. She was already in the garage, holding the jug and 3 plastic cups against her blue sweater, when her friends entered from the side door. Damn, Mila said when she saw the orange juice. Don't you know that stuff is super unhealthy? My Tio has diabetes, and that juice is the worst. It's juice. You know I'm not allowed to have any caffeine, Emery replied. This was her standard excuse for the banned drinks situation. She plopped down on the rug. The garage had been converted into a bedroom for Blessing. Why can't you just let up a little? Mila continued, sitting down next to her friend. A Diet Coke won't kill you. I need to keep up appearances until I can get out. Emery set the orange juice down. No one touched it. In case you didn't know, Coke makes caffeine-free beverages, Blessing said. 4 more years. Emery straightened her lips with irritation and pressed them together. Blessing smoothed her hair back behind her ears. She mostly wore braids, and by the end of the day, strands of her frizzy red hair swung over her face. Guys, she said, I think we need to forget about the tarot cards and those Tirzah Pyrestone ideas. I got something better to show you. Back when her family lived in Boulder, Blessing had made friends with a neighbor lady. The old woman was reportedly some kind of witch. In reality, Tirzah Pyrestone was an ordained rabbi who was addicted to tarot cards and given to ranting about the moon. Because Tirzah had taught Blessing a trick or two, the girls often played with the tarot cards, just for fun. Of course, the tarot cards were completely off limits for both Emery and Blessing, and that made it fairly exciting at first. But then nothing happened like the tarot cards predicted, or what the girls thought they were reading into the cards. Maybe they weren't predicting the future the right way. To recap the summer, just before Mila restarted 9th grade, she had spotted Blessing and Emery under a tree in the park, flipping the tarot cards. The heat that afternoon had been sweltering. Mila had slowly pushed the stroller across the grass to where the girls were sitting, trying to sense if they might be open to chat with her. She casually asked what Blessing and Emery were looking for in life, and that's how they all became friends. Mila was not at all interested in tarot cards. She just needed a break from being a teenage mother to a super cute baby boy while living in a house full of relatives. While the girls tried to meet up regularly, they kept their friendship a secret. That way there were less questions that could lead to problems. "Where's John?" Emery asked, flipping the red plastic cups onto the carpet for fun. "He's with his father tonight," Mila said. "Tristan picked him up, if that's what you're on about." Mila had a permit to drive, but no license. Because her father was an auto mechanic, Mila had learned to make minor repairs on cars, and like most of her family members, she also learned to drive cars before she was 12 years old. "Yeah, so I do take risks, but not with Juanito in the car." Mila rolled her eyes at Emery. "And you're not as innocent as you seem, so lay off." Mila looked irritably at the dream catcher hanging on the wall. "Hey," Blessing said, pulling out a plastic bag from a drawer. "Take a look. My grandma just sent me this. My mom doesn't know about it." Blessing held 3 plastic folders in her hands. The top folder read, 100 Days Savings Challenge on it. "They're budget binders. You put your cash in the pockets and save up money." Emery stared at the budget binders. She slowly picked up the one that said 5,000 Savings Challenge. "I could use this," she said, thinking of how her parents controlled the money she made by depositing everything she earned or was given into a bank account. She was expected to go to Brigham Young University like her older siblings, but she'd rather be dead than attend BYU. Emery didn't know if her parents would even allow her to use her savings for a different university education. Their names were also on the account, so whatever happened when she turned 18, she wasn't counting on getting the money right away. "See, if you don't deposit the cash on your card's bank account, you can't spend it," Blessing said firmly. She looked at her friends. "There's 3 of them. We could all plan and save up for something." Mila pulled out a cheap energy drink from her cloth bag. "You know how much Pampers cost?" she said. "Shit, I can barely afford a McDonald's hamburger." "Yuck," Emery said. "The problem is," Blessing continued, "we need to get paid more than minimum wage. We'll never be able to get a head start in life if we're only allowed to bag fries at Mickey D." Mila suddenly stretched out her hands and pulled the 100 Days Challenge binder towards her. "I'm in," she said. "Ladies, right now I'm working on a plan to earn over $50 an hour before I graduate high school." "What, with my fans?" Blessing asked. "Fuck no," Mila paused. "Like I need that scandal in my life along with the rest of all the crap already going on. Look, you know we all will be earning less than hombres our whole lives, so let's find a way to really make some money. Let's figure this game out now." She looked at her friends. "Tell the truth, I can't wait anymore for legal card age to come around. I have responsibilities and I'm so goddamn tired of this bullshit. And if you ask me, high school is not going to fix any of my problems. It's just a stepping stone at best." Emery leaned forward and whispered, "Me too. I'm so tired of this bullshit." Emery only used swear words in a whisper, and when it was safe to say them. Standing in his house, Eldon Mast stared at his bookcase. It wasn't a large bookcase. He almost reached for Dan Brown's The Symbol. He loved that book. But the thing was, the second time he'd read it, he didn't find it as captivating as the first time. So now he wasn't so sure what he thought about the book. Maybe he'd like it even less if he read it a third time. Maybe he needed novelty in his life. "You need to read an American classic, Dad," his daughter Flora teased him as they chatted over the phone. "What about Hemingway?" "Too boring," Eldon said and chuckled. Although he didn't know much about literature, he didn't like it that he didn't seem to have many cultural references to talk about during social gatherings. "Just as poetic as Cannery Row," the music director at church said when he mentioned that he'd just finished reading last year's Booker Prize. Eldon didn't even know if there was a copy of something by Steinway in the house. Maybe Zelda had one in her room, but he doubted it. He checked his watch. It was time to leave for the men's fellowship. He hoped the traffic on the diagonal wasn't too crazy, and that he wouldn't hit a mountain lion on his way out of town. Last week he had just missed one, thank God. He certainly didn't want to show up late to church and tell people that he had hit a mountain lion. What if, he thought to himself wryly behind the wheel of his sedan, what if I had hit one of the mountain lions that Noah needed in order to save God's creatures on earth? Of course, the idea was rather silly, and Eldon smiled at the thought. On the other hand, he mused to himself, there was sure a lot of mountain lions in Colorado. Perhaps one less mountain lion wasn't a bad thing. Ever since Halloween, he had had a strange feeling. Maybe it had to do with the mountain lions stalking the trick-or-treaters behind Main Street. Luckily, Mr. Noel, the chief of police, had been on the job to help keep the area safe. After men's fellowship ended, Eldon exchanged a few words about the election with his friend Withers. "What do you think the next 4 years will be like?" Eldon asked. Withers usually had a succinct way of looking at things. "Oh, you know, Trump will keep everyone busy talking about those cabinet appointments. That old smoke and mirror routine. Get 'em riled up about nothing in particular, and then pull the rug out on something more vital when they aren't looking." Withers shook his head. He had lost most of his hair in the last 20 years. Withers looked at his friend. "It might not be good, and it might not be bad," he added diplomatically. Eldon hadn't changed much over the years. He had that wild patch of hair springing out of the pores on his scalp. Still, Withers thought to himself while looking at his old friend, the church congregation was decidedly geriatric. They needed to get in some new blood in the place, like a wagon load of fresh-faced Mennonites from South America. "We need to reach out, Eldon," Withers said. "Invite some people for coffee and a donut. Times are hard. Make people understand there's a place for them here with Jesus, an eternally youthful and faithful friend who can solve everyone's problems." "Amen," Eldon automatically said. The fellowship meeting had been sparsely attended. Besides Withers and Eldon, only Everett and Bob Joe had made it, and Lolly was supposed to bring the bear claws. What happened to Lolly? Eldon had been looking forward to the bear claws. His wife Teary was a health nut and never allowed bear claws in the house. Unlike the other guys, Eldon hadn't developed diabetes yet, but Eldon was by no means an underachiever when it came to ingesting sugar. Behind the wheel, Eldon decided to stop by Voodoo Donuts on his return trip to Longmont and get himself a grape ape donut. Smiling to himself, Eldon fantasized about picking up some Mary Jane and then buying 3 grape apes to take care of the munchies. Then he shook himself. What was he thinking? He hadn't gotten high since 1982, and that had been a big mistake. Back in Longmont, Eldon parked in the empty parking lot across the street from McCarthy's pub. Facing the dive bar, Eldon reached into the paper bag and pulled out his grape ape. He was about to take a bite when a yellow Camaro pulled up and parked next to his car. Eldon shifted in his seat uncomfortably. He just wanted to eat his donut in peace and make sure his wife never found out about it. He checked that his car doors were locked. Then he looked up, and for a split second he thought he saw a shadowy figure walk out of the pub wall right where the Ruthie was painted on the sign that covered the lower part of the building wall. Eldon blinked, holding up his grape ape. Maybe, he thought, the shadow was from a passing mountain lion. But the apparition disappeared so quickly he couldn't be sure. Eldon heard the door of the Camaro open. The driver stepped out, walking a few steps towards McCarthy's pub. The driver was short and wearing baggy clothes, with a Colorado Rockies baseball cap turned sideways. The driver pivoted and walked towards Eldon's car. Eldon heard knuckles rapping on his car window. Still salivating and holding his grape ape, he cracked the window open. "Hey, you see that?" Up close, Eldon could tell that the driver was a young woman. She was a little chunky under the baggy clothes, but her face was glamorously made up. He squirmed uneasily behind the wheel. "Looked like a ghost," she prompted. Her blue eyes flashed at him. "No," Eldon said. "I didn't see anything." "You trippin'? 'Cause I'm not trippin'," the woman said and took a step back to peer at Eldon. She said. "I see you got yourself a grape ape." Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott, this multi-genre novel traces the missing novels and notebooks of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author. In real life, Keith's most important materials are actually still missing, such as his correspondence with well-known authors. But this particular version of events attempting to retrieve the missing materials is fictional, of course. Let's pick up where we left off. Did Eldon's wife discover that he had eaten a grape ape donut? Routine Apparitions, Chapter 2, Continuing Autumn 2024. Teary Filisteinsdatter Mast convinced herself that she loved chicory coffee. She told herself that the woody aroma and nutty flavor always hit the spot, the perfect solution to shake her out of her deep sleep in the mornings without giving her a case of the jitters. At night, she preset the coffee machine to start brewing on the dot so that she had time to take a shower before her daily cup of coffee alternative. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror in her bovine-themed shower cap and matching black and white robe, Teary pushed her lips forward. She muttered under her breath, "You fat, fat cow, you. You'll never be accepted as someone with something real to say. You're too fat. No one will ever believe you." But people did, and that amazed Teary. Teary wasn't also fat, but most of the time she believed that she was overweight, and this led to her peculiar brand of motivational sessions in the mirror. Every morning she showered herself with words of peroration. Of course, she never submitted her clients to the same treatment. However, she regularly advised chicory coffee as a health benefit. "You'll never have worms again," she'd announce. Some of her Mormon clients thought that this underscored the medicinal qualities of the beverage. Teary made an Excel sheet to try to understand the hot drink restrictions that Longmont's Mormon community followed. It seemed to her that each family decided their own rules on what they could and could not drink. The Noel family, for instance, banned soft drinks along with coffee, black tea, and even herbal teas. In general, when it came to the Mormon population, coffee and black tea were officially off the books, but in some cases caffeine could be treated as separate from the hot drink rules. After Teary had made her usual statement about the chicory coffee curing worms to her new client, Emily Noel had blinked twice. Teary had practiced long enough to deliver the advice with a kind of jokey good humor, along with a touch of authority on the matter. Teary hadn't had worms since 1999. That's what she said, and so far, people seemed to believe her. What bothered Teary most about the Mormon hot drink rules was that they weren't set in stone, and, over time, adjustments had been made to the rules by the official church spokesman. If adjustments had to be made to the rules, Teary reckoned, then the rules were not genuine rules. In Teary's book, rules had to be real rules, like presetting the coffee machine after loading the dishwasher at night. At the end of the first appointment, Emily Noel carefully explained to Teary that she did not want her kids to become addicted to soft drinks. She mentioned that she would pray on the option of chicory coffee. Emily also presented her belief that the federal government intended her children to become addicted to soft drinks. In her mind, the government was supporting soda companies with nefarious connections, and this was against the teachings of Jesus Christ. Emily Noel left Teary's consultation office and went back to the hair salon on Main Street, where she worked as a hair technician, leaving Teary to puzzle over the Excel sheet. Teary was unsure where on her banned hot drinks Excel sheet she should put the fear of developing symptoms of anti-Christian depravity. Then she thought about the conspiracy theory, which supported the idea of soft drink companies having connections to foreign socialist governments trying to overtake the world economy and control capitalism. Teary loved the concept, and she loved that concept with all its contradictions included. But most of all, she especially loved that Emily Noel really believed in the conspiracy theory. Teary had half an hour before she was due in her office. She was sipping on her first and only cup of chicory coffee in the morning when her husband wandered into the kitchen. Eldon was wearing a pumpkin-colored fleece jacket. "Elle," Teary said, putting her cup down, "you need to use some hair gel and tame your wild Don King look." Eldon said, sitting down at the breakfast bar counter in their teal-blue kitchen. "I baked you some granola bars to take to the meet and greet," Teary said, changing the subject. "I used up the cranberry sauce." She nodded at the Tupperware container on the counter. "That's great," Eldon said without enthusiasm. "T, you didn't happen to hear of any more mountain lion sightings?" "Okay, I appreciate your concern about the prairie dogs, but this is the third time this week that you've asked about mountain lion sightings," Teary said. She picked up a boiled egg and began to slowly peel it. Eldon wasn't particularly concerned with prairie dogs in general, but it so happened that he had 10 prairie dogs in cages living in his garage. It hadn't been his idea. His wife was planning on giving them out as Christmas presents. It was a new passion of Teary's, saving the local prairie dogs. She had heard they made good pets, but first she was making gosh darn sure that the animals completed a good detox routine, cleaning out those parasites in their intestines, before she wedged them into breathable boxes with red bows and presented them to her family members. Keith Abbott woke up in his garage in Longmont. After he died, Keith continually found himself waking up in his garage in Longmont. It seemed like a garage was his version of eternity. Sometimes he woke up suspended in midair, and sometimes he woke up on the workbench that was hidden behind a screen. One time he woke up on the rug. That wrecked his back for a whole day. He had long suffered a bad back, and the cold cement floor really did a number on him. This time he woke up suspended in midair by the back door of 1046 Grant Street. That figured. For the past few days, Keith had been out and about trying to get through to the Rhino Ritz Detective Agency. After testing all the disconnected telephone cells on Main Street, he eventually found an operator who placed his call. Dialing 415-526-1629, he was put through to the Ritz Hotel in Paris. Keith carefully enunciated the purpose of his call into the phone. "I'd like to speak with Rhino Ritz," he said. "You're not the only one," came the reply. "May I leave a message?" Keith asked, thinking hard. He had to come up with a witty replique that would get him noticed. "No," the voice said. Keith did not recognize the voice, and this did not deter him. "What if I say that I am stuck in a redneck woo-woo town in Colorado and need Ernest Hemingway to save my manuscripts from possible extinction?" "Ah. Ernest Hemingway checked out last week." The voice paused. "You might try Pablo's Box Refurbishing Limited." "Something happened to his suit?" Keith asked, bringing to mind the big cardboard box that Ernie wore to both his work and leisure activities. After all, Ernest Hemingway had earned his author spot in the limelight, and he was worthy of being a boxed set. "There was an incident." "I see," Keith said. "I advise Google Chrome," and the line went dead. Keith reviewed this conversation as he gently floated to the floor upon waking. Through the soles of his Tai Chi shoes he felt the cold of the winter. He looked around the garage and saw that the girl was organizing her things. He lightly stepped onto the rug and took up mountain pose. Dressed for school, the girl was pulling out a binder from behind the dresser. She was a thin girl with frizzy red hair pulled back into braids and a flat button nose. After counting a small wad of bills 3 times, the girl selected $25 and placed the money in one of the pockets of the binder. She crossed out the number 25 on the front page with a black marker pen. Keith liked the look of the marker pen. It was a fat-tipped pen. On the side was written, "Phantom Genius." Blessing was walking along the linoleum-lined hallway with Emery. They were heading to their French class. "Do you know how hard it is to fill that binder?" she asked her friend. "I'm getting really frustrated." Emery smiled. "I hear you." She had been able to get a spot at the retirement home on Thanksgiving, handing out cards and flowers donated by Longmont florists to elderly people without family. She had pocketed some hefty tips. "Let me help you," Emery said. "Longmont florist. They will pay on the books, but you earn cash. It's not bad money, and they're nice people. I'll set it up." But I thought that was your gig, Blessing said. Yeah, but my parents know how much I make and make me put all the money in the bank. Most of the tips I manage to keep for myself, though. But your mom won't take the money away from you, so it's better you work there than me. Cool, Blessing said, awestruck by her friend's generosity. I've been accepted as a candy striper. Emery flashed her blue eyes brightly. That doesn't pay, Blessing said and frowned. That's what you think. Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott, this detective novel tracks the missing archival materials of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author. In real life, Keith's most important materials are actually still missing, such as his notes for his memoir on Richard Brautigan. But this particular version of events here, attempting to retrieve the missing materials, is fictional, of course. Let's pick up where we left off. If you've been waiting for F. Scott Fitzgerald to show up, you're in luck. Routine Apparitions, Chapter 3, Roundabout Thanksgiving 2024. Tirzah Pyrestone was meeting her old friend Gator Matcha at the Texas Roadhouse located just inside Longmont city limits. They were going to discuss their follow-up project called The Direct Road to the Nearest Neighborhood, How to Reach Your Inner Artistic Spirit. Simon & Schuster was mildly interested. Tirzah had driven up from Boulder in her Outback Subaru that had a decal across both sides exclaiming Outback Oracle. It was her side hustle. She dabbled in Uber. Perhaps, Gator said, looking out at the geyser blue Outback Oracle in the parking lot and hearing his agent's words of warning about this particular collaboration ringing in his head, you might consider helping me prepare the lecture material for the book promos. A PowerPoint would be useful. Maybe you could use a break from the driving routine, for instance. Time to reflect, he suggested. I appreciate your concern for me, Gator, but as you well know, due to these tragic and catastrophic days on this planet, I happen to be one of the ones who is called to guide those in dire need of transportative meditation sessions. Our collective grief is everywhere, snapped Tirzah. Tirzah had no time to entertain Gator's ideas about honing his own professional image. She had a refinanced mortgage to pay, connections to make, and enough energy to churn up cauldrons of unrealized cryptogenetic trauma across 5 counties. She also had a trunk full of books which she sold on the side during her Uber hours. Tirzah was remarkably successful at offloading copies of Under the Earth, The Grip of the Thriving Potato to women passengers. It was a partial memoir. But when her passenger happened to be a man, she tended to push her CD entitled Ashy Bonfire Memories, which was a collection of zone-out meditative tracks. Besides, it was her idea to transform Gator's old concept by rehashing and rejuvenating his ghost theme for their new book, and it therefore seemed to her the whole project was her original idea that Gator's agent was trying to sell to Simon & Schuster. Why should she be the one to make the PowerPoint? Gator looked tired, but then he never looked anything other than tired. Even when he was in his early 20s, he had appeared exhausted. It had not gone unnoticed. No one had ever expected much of Gator to come up to the surface. Now, like Tirzah, he was on the verge of turning 70. In true form, Gator peered morosely across the restaurant. He didn't often react. It could have been all those decades working as a therapist to drug addicts. Then again, he was also regularly partaking of a stash of potentially therapeutic drugs as a demonstration to the healing powers of his own decades-long research program on reversing trauma. And this routine had definitely dulled his senses. However, Gator was wrinkling his brow enough to alert Tirzah that he was witnessing something. "That man over there," Gator said in his hoarse-sounding voice that had always sounded hoarse. "He looks like F. Scott Fitzgerald. Not the young one. The old one." Tirzah whipped her head around. Looking out from under the fringe of her blonde wig, she saw not one single soul sitting in the direction of Gator's gaze. "What are you saying, Gator?" He's dressed. When Gator talked, barely any of the syllables coming out of his mouth had any voiced tones, so Gator always sounded neither surprised nor disappointed. "Like back in the day, you know, with the vest and tie, and he's come to me." Gator, fixated on his vision, appeared to be in a trance. "Rudolph knows." They were interrupted. "Okay, I got you 2 iced absinthe coolers topped with maple cream, double shots of booze," the waitress with the bountiful chest said, setting down their specialty drinks. "Are you guys ready for some food?" "Who ordered these?" Gator asked, looking down at the drinks. Mila was picking up the receipts. Her aunt worked as a manager at the Texas Roadhouse. She also prepared the books for A to Z Motor Care, but mainly as a favor. "Listen, tell your father I won't have time for this anymore," Carmen said as she handed Mila the shoebox. "I can probably finish off this year, but next year is too much." "Why don't you teach me, Tia?" Mila suggested. "You have time? What about school?" "So how much time will it take to learn?" Mila said. "This is bookkeeping. You have to be accurate," Carmen said carefully. "What if I bring a friend and we both learn it? My girl Blessing is really into numbers and good at details. We can help each other." Carmen looked at Mila. She had already talked to her niece about budgeting and wanted Mila to have enough skills to stand on her own 2 feet. After all, there was Juanito. Mila had certainly learned her lesson the hard way about trusting people, but she was proving herself to be a good mother. True, Carmen reflected, Mila had stopped hanging around the people she used to hang with and was growing up fast. Soon Mila would be 16, and basically the work Carmen did for A to Z Motor Care was a sequel to budgeting. Money in and money out, checking receipts and invoices. "You trust Blessing?" Carmen asked. 100%. How much time will it take to learn?" Carmen shrugged. "It's just a software program. But you need to understand the consequences when you enter data, and that takes time." "But Papa's accountant checks it, right?" "Right. You don't need to handle the tax part, but you don't want to make mistakes." Carmen hesitated. Then she smiled. "Mija, let's try it. We can at least give it a shot during your school break. You promise to come? Sandra can watch Juanito. And remember, you know I don't like to waste my time." Mila confirmed the dates her aunt mentioned, and she said she'd double-check with Blessing. Holding the box, she turned and watched 2 elderly people argue at a table in an empty area of the restaurant. They were thin and anxious-looking people wearing unattractive khaki-green clothing. "There's no one there," the woman in the blonde wig said loudly. "You have got to stop taking that stuff every day. You are hallucinating." The buxom waitress came to pick up an order at the counter where Carmen and Mila were standing. "Are they all right?" Carmen asked. "Should I go over and talk to them?" "He says F. Scott Fitzgerald ordered their drinks," the waitress said, "so I don't know." Mila was just 15 pages short of finishing The Great Gatsby for her English class and was due to write a book report before the end of the semester. "That dude's alive? He must be ancient." Mila really didn't see the point in wasting her time reading The Great Gatsby. She'd much rather learn bookkeeping. "Maybe it's his ghost," Carmen joked. Keith Abbott spent the morning at the Longmont Public Library. He got there well before 9 and waited outside the front door for 5 minutes. Then he realized that he was dead, and he could walk in, day or night. It hadn't occurred to him that he could break his old routine. He had always liked to go to bed early and wake up early. He walked past the Friends of the Longmont Library bookstore in the lobby and into the reading room. He took off his wool hat and unwrapped the shawl from his shoulders. He was wearing his white woolen kimono over his white Shetland sweater. Keith caught his reflection in the mirror. His hair was snow-white and growing. It was longer than Allen Ginsberg's longest hairstyle, and Allen had been extremely hairy. Keith missed his students at Naropa. He thought about taking the bus down to Boulder to visit the campus. Of course, his students had long gone. It had been years. Sighing a little, Keith typed Rhino Ritz into the computer in front of him. Nothing came up. The Longmont Public Library didn't even have a copy of his book in the collection. He eventually found access to Google Chrome. He entered "Where is Rhino Ritz" into the web search function. A chat box flipped up on the screen. Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott, this detective novel tracks the missing archive materials of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author. In real life, Keith's most important materials are actually still missing, such as something poet Ted Berrigan sent to Keith. What could it have been? But this particular podcast version of events attempting to retrieve the missing materials is fictional, of course. Let's pick up where we left off. If you've been wanting to attend a Mennonite fellowship meeting, here's your chance. Routine Apparitions, Chapter 4, Still November, 2024. Seated in the Longmont Public Library, Keith Abbott stared at the computer screen for several minutes. The chat box had opened up with a question. But the real state of nirvana, what's it like? Keith knew that this was a test. He recognized the question and understood there was no real answer. It had been part of the Zen training before and after being ordained as a Zen monk. This was one of those Zen questions that was regularly set out like a roadblock, preventing potential flare-ups of the ego. Keith was thinking that sitting in the Longmont Public Library in Longmont, Colorado, was a far cry from actually experiencing nirvana. But, then again, was it? Maybe the fact that the Longmont Public Library did not own a single copy of any of his books was, in truth, ideal for Keith to reach the state of nirvana. He was free of himself. On the other hand, maybe the Longmont Public Library itself had obtained nirvana. After all, the building had been built on sacred Native American ground. Attempting to circumvent any further delays because of the controversy surrounding the blueprint, the contractors swiftly and secretly began to gas the surrounding prairie dog population until protest emerged from the protesters who, up to that point, had been busy with protesting the building. Thereafter, a relocation program was set up for the prairie dogs. As a result, the civic building, the Longmont Public Library, had possibly achieved unobstructed connection with its own innate Buddha nature. Keith liked this thought. It was satirical. He started to imagine the Longmont Public Library as a wobbly cartoon-like representation, drawn in black ink on rice paper. His hands started to itch. He wanted to hold his brush again. In his imaginary drawing, a sign saying Nirvana was nailed to the front of the Longmont Public Library, while prairie dogs in cages were being driven away in vans. But how was he to reply to the Zen question and get in touch with the Rhino Ritz Detective Agency to ask them to find his missing notebooks and manuscripts? It certainly was a very delicate matter. Keith knew he had to be truthful and go the way of the Dharma. He glanced around him. He was looking for simplicity, enclosure, and completeness. He was looking at a poster of Lake Estes. He typed in his response. Alpine lake, snowy mountains, trout tails slapping at the bait. Son, don't fight over women. Let women fight over you. And he pressed enter. Julie came home from her shift at the restaurant to find Blessing and Mila in the garage. The two girls were sitting on the floor in front of the infrared heat panel. Blessing was typing into her laptop. A 10-month-old baby slept in a car seat next to them. Julie said hello. I don't think I've met you before, she stated, and looked at Mila, and then she looked at the baby. Hi, Mrs. Alexander, Mila said. She introduced herself. And this is John, she added, touching the baby's leg. The baby was wearing a clean pair of Star Wars Chewbacca overalls from Target. A light green fleece blanket lay next to the car seat. "It's Mrs. Collins," Julie corrected Mila. "Are you girls babysitting?" "We're working on our book reports," Blessing replied. "They're due on Friday." "Blessing is helping me because I'm not very good at writing book reports. I had to drop out last year to have John," Mila said politely, lifting up her blue eyes. She'd gone easy on the mascara that day. "My aunt will pick me and John up in an hour." Julie continued to look carefully at Mila. The dark-haired teenager was wearing baggy jeans and a sweatshirt. Julie couldn't see if Mila had any tattoos. Julie had a small amount of tattoos discreetly hidden under her shirt. She was thinking about getting them removed to set a better example for her daughter, but that cost money. "Roy took Taylor to the park," Blessing said, reading her mother's mind. Julie turned and stepped back into the kitchen. Shutting the garage door, she took a deep breath. Then she reached up and opened the nearest cupboard door. She pulled out a tray of seasonings, thinking she should clean up the cupboards while deciding what to make for dinner, and this way she might eavesdrop. Just a little. In the garage, Blessing looked at Mila, and Mila looked back at her friend. "So, next question," Blessing said in a clear voice. "What kind of character qualities does Daisy have? How would her friends describe her?" "Well, she sure can't drive," Mila answered loudly. Eldon Mast was sitting in his sedan. He was studying the side wall of McCarthy's pub. It had been weeks since he had seen something. Had it been a ghost? He hadn't seen whatever it was since that November night, and not for want of trying. He'd been staking out the wall every week after men's fellowship, and he was as unenlightened as he'd ever been. Earlier that night, Withers, Everett, and Bob Joe had arrived on time for the meeting. Lolly was supposed to bring the bear claws, but Lolly had the flu. Their assigned scripture reflection concerned the idea of having a firm grip on the Rock of Ages. The idea was to securely climb the Rock of Ages to new spiritual heights. Eldon listened to the questions the group was supposed to address. "Are you putting your feet on solid ground? Are you sure? Is the rock you base your life upon too small?" That was a trick question. "Do you believe the rock can hold your life together?" Meanwhile, all Eldon could think about was Good Times Burgers and frozen custard on 26th Street. "Hey, Donnie," Everett poked at Eldon's plaid shirt, "come back down to earth." Eldon coughed and immediately stated that he was a firm believer in the rock. He honestly felt that the church was his mainstay in life. Jesus was always there, even if you didn't always see him. As Jesus said, Eldon lightly flipped through the New Testament in his hand, grasping at straws while his stomach rumbled. "I am the bread of life, and this here is the passage from Matthew that my dad often read for us." Eldon looked down. His father had recently passed away. "Everyone, therefore, who hears these words of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on a rock." "We definitely need to build solid platforms in our lives, that's for sure," Bob Joe said, shaking his head for emphasis. Bob Joe was a very reassuring person. "So how would you visualize your rock, Bob Joe?" Withers asked. "Earthquake-proof, that's for sure," Bob Joe replied and chuckled. "We definitely need to be prepared," Everett said. "Anything can happen," Eldon joined in. "Earthquakes are unusual in Colorado," Withers remarked. "Has anyone considered a grounding cord?" Kane asked. Kane was a new member to their men's fellowship group. "Do you think that it will shake that much?" Bob Joe asked. "It's a technique to help ground you mentally and physically. Rabbi Pyrestone is giving a class down at the community center." A silence fell upon the group. I'm not sure about that," Bob Joe muttered. "Sounds intriguing," Withers said mildly. Then the music director quoted Kipling. "And God who clears the grounding berg and steers the grinding flow, he hears the cry of the kit fox and the wind along the snow." "Well," Everett said, "I, for one, can say that I don't miss the snow this year." "Sure makes driving easier," Bob Joe said uneasily. "I heard there's an interdenominational petition against climate change going around," Kane mentioned. He was young, enthusiastic, and had been raised on an apple farm. A silence fell upon the older men. "Is that a CD player?" "It looks like one," Kane said. "I just got this meditation CD." He reached in and pulled Ashy Bonfire Memories out of his backpack. A half hour after the meeting ended, Eldon was sitting in his car in front of McCarthy's pub. He noticed the sign, "Live Music Tonight." Suddenly, Eldon wanted a beer. He felt like he deserved a beer. He also wanted to rinse Ashy Bonfire Memories out of his ears. He used to go to live music back when he was in college. What happened to him? As he walked into the dive bar, Eldon realized that he'd never been to that low a dive bar before in his life. The pub featured a lot of green accents to the decoration. The interior read wood panels plus green accents. The greens didn't always match in hue. Eldon ordered a Budweiser. Inside the bar, he definitely wasn't seeing any ghosts. Everyone around him seemed very present. And tonight a man was introducing the four-man band that was set up on the platform. "It's unusual here at McCarthy's, but we are proud to present Longmont's very own. Give it up for the Spiritual Predators." The people in the bar clapped obligingly. Thank you all for coming." The band singer looked around the bar. The place wasn't packed, but it also wasn't empty. "We'd like to start off with a little number called Goose Shit Park. Y'all know what I'm talking about." Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott, this detective novel tracks the missing archival materials of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author. In real life, Keith's most important materials are actually still missing. And of course, what everyone wants to know is what happened to his 1971 play entitled The Rhubarb. But this particular podcast version of events attempting to retrieve the missing materials is fictional, of course. Let's pick up where we left off. In the last chapter, we all admired an actual poem by Keith Kumasen Abbott. Alpine lake, snowy mountains, trout tails slapping at the bait. Son, don't fight over women, let women fight over you. You have to admit, it would make a great country and western song. Routine Apparitions, Chapter 5, end of November 2024. Julie lay in her bed. Roy was also laying in the bed. They were laying next to each other in bed in the bungalow house on 1046 Grant Street. "Did you know Blessing was friends with Mila?" Julie asked. "Nope." "Her aunt was nice. She said they called Mila their very own Cameron Diaz," Julie said. "Why?" "Because of the blue eyes," Julie replied, but she was busy thinking about Mila's baby. "Julie, why do you like Emery?" Roy asked. "Well, for one, she's not a teenage mother," Julie sighed. Roy was considering the consequences of saying what was on his mind. "You know, the LDS is pretty racist." Julie didn't say anything. "They won't ever really accept Blessing. Of course, it's great that Emery and Blessing are friends, but I question," Roy paused, "the idea that Blessing should spend so much time with those Mormons." "Okay, Roy, I get that the LDS does not hold an open-minded view of the world. And I'm definitely not encouraging my daughter to gussy up like a deranged baker to save souls," Julie snapped. "God help me, I used to do it, once upon a time." "Look, she's nearly 15, Roy said. He was thinking it was a shame that he hadn't been able to take his stepdaughter fishing that fall. They both enjoyed being up at the lake, and somehow it just hadn't worked out this year. Where had the time gone? "I just don't know what to do to keep her safe," Julie said. "Blessing's a good kid. Why don't I take her out to lunch on Sunday?" Roy offered. Julie turned to Roy. "You never take me out to lunch," she said. Roy turned to face Julie. "You never take me out to lunch," he said. Doesn't mean I wouldn't like to, Julie said. Well, you could always surprise me one of these days, Roy said. I'll tell you what, Julie tapped Roy on his salt and pepper chest. Why don't we both try to surprise each other by next Monday? Doesn't have to cost any money. Just a nice surprise. Roy looked at Julie with a twinkle in his eye. Say there, are you trying to romance me? Keith Abbott set foot into McCarthy's pub at the exact same time Eldon Mast was being thrown out of the bar. Keith had entered the bar via the portal in the wall that led him to and from Monterey, California, and Eldon was exiting via the front door that directly led to Main Street in Longmont, Colorado. The band had just finished playing their freshest tune entitled Goose Shit Park. The song had met with the audience's approval, and the band was being served around beers. Keith Abbott looked around the bar. While living, he'd never spent any time at the establishment because he realized that it declined a certain kind of clientele. He decided, since he was invisible, to stick around for the next song. He settled in the back of the bar to watch the scene. The band leader was wearing a cowboy hat and sneakers. The drummer looked about 16 and wore a white singlet partially covered by a white towel. Playing the bass was a nondescript guy sporting a raccoon hat. But it was the keyboardist who had the most style of them all. The dude was decked out in a flannel bathrobe, cowboy boots, and a travel pillow hung around his neck. You might have noticed, the band leader was saying, Sleepy Sam here is ready for the tour. Brett leaned over and took a sip of his beer. Too bad we don't have a tour. Nowhere to Longmont, man, a voice shouted. You can never leave. I was told that was California, Brett said, looking out over the crowd. Listen, y'all, we're happy you all made it here to McCarthy's tonight, so here's our next song, written by Sleepy Sam himself. 1, 2, and a 1, and a 2. The band began to play a ballad. I told her the night we met, a desert is not plagued by weeds. Keith was enjoying himself. He glanced around. A woman was looking straight at him. He realized that she could see him. She started talking into her friend's ear. Keith got up. Should he leave through the door or the wall? In his white kimono and long flowing hair, he looked pretty out of sorts at McCarthy's bar. He decided he should leave as quickly as possible. He ducked behind the bar counter and exited through the wall. Sitting in his sedan, Eldon was reviewing his disgrace. He was unhappy, and because he liked to think he was a guy who could reasonably talk to anyone, he was most unhappy about not being able to fit in for a bare minimum of 10 minutes while at McCarthy's pub. How would he ever become a successful missionary? Not that he had tried, but it had been a dream of his before he had gotten married. He still thought about it at night. He was still trying to envision in which peaceful country he might still be able to perform missionary work for his Lord and Savior Jesus, when he saw something slip out of the sign on the side of the bar. There it was. Eldon sat up to take a closer look. He could just see a blurry form. This time he was certain it was not a mountain lion. He was startled when 2 women bolted out of the bar's front door and came round the side of the building. They were obviously looking for something, and no one had tossed either one of them out of the bar. They gestured wildly at the form that was moving away from the bar. Eldon watched as the 2 women started to chase the blurry form. The blurry form started to pick up speed. Eldon thought he recognized one of the women. He started the car's engine. Yes, he thought, as he turned onto Main Street and headed north. That is Candace. Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form, which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott, this quasi-sci-fi novel researches the case of the missing archive materials of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author. In real life, Keith's most important materials are actually still missing. Who, for instance, has the manuscript of his autobiographical work about his early university years as a jock entitled Whack Jobs? But this particular podcast version of events attempting to retrieve the missing materials is fictional, of course. If you haven't felt the influence of religious identities yet, you will surely not miss it in this upcoming chapter. And don't despair, the supernatural vibe continues. Routine Apparitions, Chapter 6. Emery thought that the avocado was real. But, come to think of it, the Doritos bag was also possible, but then again, something about it told her that it was cake. Eden, Emily Noel said, looking at the can of Coca-Cola, that better not be soda. Now, Mom, Eden said, don't be shocked. She picked up the knife and sliced through the can. See, it's an illusion. Emily smiled. That's so clever, slicing through those devils to get those blessings. What about the Doritos? Emery asked. Eden brought the knife down on the Doritos bag. It gave way easily. The interior looked like red velvet cake. The avocado, Eden said, tapping on the top with a blade, is real. Eden was trying to pick up business for her company, Ape for Cake. I've got to deliver 3 cakes today, Eden said. Emery, can you help me? I can drop you off at the hospital afterwards. Emery shrugged. Sure, let me get my bag. So, Mom, Eden said, do you think you can mention my illusion cake to your customers? Don't you think you should focus on wedding cakes? Emily said, frowning. I have 6 wedding cakes on my agenda in the coming months, so don't worry. I am tapping into that market. But, Eden sighed, I will need to buffer with something else, and illusion cake is really hot right now. Sitting beside Eden in the Ape for Cake minivan, Emery took note of the route. Where are we going, Eden? Aunt Candace ordered a Christmas cake for her group, Eden said. Don't tell Mom. Exactly what did Aunt Candace order? Emery asked. A Christmas coffee cake. The kind with coffee? No, there's no coffee in it. So, Emery said, it's the kind of cake that is served with coffee. Probably, Eden said, and that's not my business. Eden was 10 years older than Emery. She was married and living outside of Longmont where the real estate was cheaper. Aunt Candace lived in the countryside village of Longmont Manufactured Homes and was the leader of the Kindred Spirit community, which investigated paranormal happenings. It's the box with the green ribbon, Eden said as she pulled up to Aunt Candace's trailer. Emery climbed out of the van and opened the side door. She picked up the box and glared at her sister. It figured that Eden didn't want to face Aunt Candace, even if Aunt Candace ordered a cake from Ape for Cake. Emery! Aunt Candace exclaimed when she opened the door. My word, you've grown! She waved Emery in. Emery set the box down on the kitchen counter. Are you having a meeting? She asked. You won't believe it, the ghost enthusiast exclaimed. But we have seen paranormal activities at McCarthy's pub with our very own eyes. You went to McCarthy's pub? Emery asked, shocked. Aunt Candace wasn't practicing Mormonism anymore, but it was pretty far-fetched that she would go so far as to enter into a seedy bar. We were following that band to see what they were up to, Aunt Candace beamed. What band? The Spiritual Predators. They should be outlawed, Aunt Candace said firmly. Aunt Candace took it upon herself to protect ghosts from ostracism and obliteration. They heard a car honk outside. That's your sister, Aunt Candace said. Here, this is for the cake, and this, she flourished a $20 bill, is for you, sweetie. Don't tell your folks. Eldon Mast was standing in A to Z Auto Care. His sedan had broken down just shy of First Avenue, and Eldon had lost sight of Candace and her friend. He had sat in the empty street for a moment trying to start the car again, and then got out of the driver's seat to push the car to the curb. New coils, Lorenzo said. How much? Eldon asked. Mila, Lorenzo turned to the back office. Can you take care of this gentleman? Mila appeared. She smiled at Eldon. I thought I recognized your car, she said. Eldon looked startled. The night of the ghost. You had a grape ape. Oh, Eldon said. He looked down. That will be $450 before tax. Cash or card? Mila asked. card. Mila took his card. It's not like you were doing anything bad, you know. Gertrude Stein cleared her throat. I will now call this meeting to order, she said. We have received many applications beseeching our help. She looked sternly at F. Scott Fitzgerald. But we cannot assist all those in need. We must choose. Fish, Ernest Hemingway said. I like the one about fish. I don't feel that one was specifically about trout, Sherwood Anderson said. It was succinct, Gertrude said, unlike the others. They were sitting at Enrico's in San Francisco on Rue de la Paix. Nestor Marzipan, F. Scott Fitzgerald said. He knows the fellow. Who doesn't Nestor Marzipan know? Ernie asked. The point is, Gertrude said, this Abbott knows Nestor Marzipan. Point taken, Gertrude, Sherwood said. Not everyone knows Nestor Marzipan. It's a pity, F. Scott Fitzgerald said, looking into his glass of absinthe. Lie Down, Oakland, I Think I Love You is a poetic masterpiece as title in itself. What about Abbott? Is he any good? Sherwood asked. We'll have to find his manuscripts to answer that question, Ernie said. Then it is settled, Gertrude said. Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott, based loosely on facts, the work researches the case of the missing archive materials of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author. In real life, Keith's most important materials are actually still missing, and his daughter Persephone is on the hunt. Will anything stop her? But this particular version of podcast events attempting to retrieve the missing materials is fictional, of course. Let's pick up where we left off. The Rhino Ritz Detective Agency is willing to help Keith Kumasen Abbott find his missing notebooks. This is totally logical, since Keith himself invented the Rhino Ritz Detective Agency. Routine Apparitions, Chapter 7, The Gift of Prairie Dogs. In her home office, Teary Filisteinsdatter Mast was examining her master Excel sheet. She labeled the sheet's tabs with the abbreviations of various organizations. She updated information on the banned drinks column on the Excel sheet with the tab reading, Phew. Whelping Wellness was the name of her coaching business. It had that natural vibe to it, an almost inevitable outcome. Other tabs on the master Excel sheet stored information about all kinds of other organizations, or more specifically information on the people involved with the other organizations that Teary had access to because of her interests. After the beige widow died, leaving an entire filing case in her care, Teary had excitedly added more information to her master Excel sheet. What a goldmine! Teary clicked on the tab reading OVU, which stood for Oasis of Venerable Uncertainty. She had been busy with this project for 2 years. She examined the name. Rosenberg. Yes, she thought Rosenberg would do. Lilith Rosenberg didn't smell as clean as she claimed. After Teary finished writing her letters, she printed them out along with the corresponding address labels. There, she thought. Then she checked the status of the festive Christmas animal transport boxes that she had ordered from Amazon. They would deliver them that afternoon. Eldon should be home about that time. His car was working again. Why had he stalled on 1st and Main Street was still a mystery to Teary. He said, in that vague manner of his, that he had taken a slight detour coming back from church that evening to check out the signage on a new shop. Swiftly pulling a tissue from a box on her desk, Teary covered her fingers and pulled out 2 envelopes from the box at her feet. Then she extracted the letters from the printer tray. Using a ruler, she folded them and carefully put 1 letter in each stamped envelope. She placed the letters individually in Ziploc bags and stuck them into her tote bag. Before leaving the house, Teary went into the garage to check on the prairie dogs. They looked plump and healthy. plenty of fresh food and water. The animals were active in their cages, burrowing and darting in and out of the wood shavings. Emery stood in the door to the hospital room with the number 77. Two small eyes looked back at her. The brown eyes were hooded. The face didn't move. The body, barely perceptible under the white sheet, lay still. "I brought you your flowers," Emery said. "They arrived this morning." From his hospital bed, Gator Matcha looked at the blonde and blue-eyed girl. She was holding a pot of poinsettias. He was allergic to poinsettias. He was partial to blondes. "Would you like me to read the card?" Emery looked for a card. There was no card. "I can check for you who sent it," she said. Gator shook his head. He reached an arm out for the cloth pouch next to his bed. "What you can do for me," he said hoarsely, "is give it to someone else." He pulled out a 20. "And please come back before you leave. I have a request to make. Could you bring me something when you come? You are coming again." "Yes, tomorrow, but not for long," Emery said with a smile. "Good." Gator was exhausted. The girl left the room. Gator's head felt like lead. What had happened to him? He was pretty sure he was in Longmont, Colorado. He had been hired by Buck Rogers. Had Buck paid him yet? The cattle rancher was rich beyond belief, but traumatized. Yes, that was certain. There was an aura of trauma about the ranch, and not just because of the fate of the lowing cattle. There was more to Buck than met the eye. The last thing Gator remembered was getting back to his hotel room at the Holiday Inn Express and Suites after spending the afternoon in session with Buck Rogers. Buck had been pretty antsy about something and wanted to take Gator out for a ride to shoot prairie dogs. There was an art to it, as Buck said. Gator had distracted Buck for a while until Buck realized his minutes were flowing. This was about the time Chief of Police Noel showed up. The lawman had something to discuss with Buck. Gator had waited in the atrium next to the aquarium for the men to finish whatever they had to say to each other. 2 weeks had already passed, and he was supposed to be paid in cash. Gator had been hired for 3 weeks to sort Buck's problems out. When he wasn't working with Buck, Gator was editing his half of The Direct Road to the Nearest Neighborhood, How to Reach Your Inner Artistic Spirit, back at the hotel. Hotels were great places to write novels. Yet somehow Gator was experiencing a writer's block and was unhappy with the project. Maybe that's why F. Scott Fitzgerald had appeared to him. Strange that Tirzah hadn't spotted Fitzgerald, but she didn't have the pharmaceutical edge that Gator did. Could it be that Gator was channeling divine inspiration better than Tirzah? Maybe Gator was writing a novel without knowing it. Was The Direct Road to the Nearest Neighborhood, How to Reach Your Inner Artistic Spirit, becoming an iconic work of culturally great literature akin to Tender is the Night? Something about rotten eggs, Gator thought wearily, as his dinner tray was placed before him. Keith Abbott had the garage on 1046 Grant Street to himself. The girl was working at the florist all day, and business was certainly good during the holiday season. He let out a sigh, glad to be alone. That lean woman had been in good condition. Keith suspected she ran marathons. It had been quite a sprint to lose her. He ducked into the Civic Council on Kimbark Street, figuring that there probably was a force of obtuse thought surrounding the building that would block his spirit energy from perception. Keith had been right. For safety's sake, he spent the night on the table in the boardroom, only waking up when he realized he was in a 7:30 a.m. meeting about zoning issues. None of these people recognized that Keith was in the room. Settling into a meditative position, Keith focused on a koan. He felt he needed to focus and, at the same time, distract himself. Was he able to do both? The voice of Ry Cooter floated into his ear. "I got money in my pocket, I ain't begging for bread. Cadillac Eldorado going to my head. Got a short time to live and a long time to stay dead." Keith smiled. Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott, she minutely researches the case of the missing archival materials of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author. In real life, Keith's most important materials are actually still missing, and it's a surreal situation, but then Keith often wrote about surreal situations. So why not continue along the thought line of the truth being stranger than fiction by creating fiction? Let's recap the situation, shall we? The ghost of Keith Kumasen Abbott has called upon his own invention to help him find his missing manuscripts. Will the Rhino Ritz Detective Agency show up and get the job done? Meanwhile, it has not escaped Persephone's attention that a whole host of religious groups may have some clues as to what happened to her father's missing materials. Routine Apparitions, Chapter 8, A Few Nights Before Christmas 2024. Michael Soule was sitting in Beer Springs. He was talking with Ernest Hemingway. Ernest was wearing his box because he was a famous author of many books that eventually were sold in boxed sets. The cardboard box was patched with electrician's tape on one corner. Even with his box on, Ernest could sit at a bar and easily drink a beer in Monterey. Mike wasn't famous, and he was wearing his oatmeal-colored sweater. Mike felt very happy and warm in his oatmeal-colored sweater. "So, Rhino Ritz is taking Keith's case," Michael said, his eyes gleaming behind his glasses. "That's right," Ernest Hemingway said. His left hand grasped the fishing spear that was resting on the floor. He thumped it up and down 3 times. "You gonna hunt Keith's manuscripts down and spear them?" Mike inquired. "Just point me in the right direction," Ernest said. "But you'll have to help me get on the back of the truck. Smitty's driving." "Sure," Mike said enthusiastically. "Just you and Smitty, then?" "Reconnaissance trip." "Right," Mike said, thinking he'd like to come along too. "Anyone riding shotgun?" "Do you know Colorado?" "Like the back of my hand," Mike said. This wasn't necessarily true, but Mike knew the way to the portal that led to McCarthy's pub on Main Street, and he figured that was a good start. "I told you," Teary Filisteinsdatter Mast said to her husband, "not to put them in the boxes until I said so." Eldon stood in the garage next to the empty cages. There was no denying it. They'd lost 4 of the prairie dogs, and that evening their kids were coming to their family Christmas dinner. The prairie dogs had chewed through the cardboard gift boxes. "Well, they've got to be here in the garage," Eldon said. He pulled his leather work gloves on and looked around. "Never mind for now," Terry cried. "We still have 6, and that's enough. Everyone will still get a prairie dog. 1 for Zelda and 1 for Zelda's husband. 1 for Flora and 1 for Flora's husband. Just put ribbons around the necks of 4 of them," she said. "But don't put them in the gift boxes yet." There was certainly nothing that said Central Colorado more than receiving a live prairie dog for Christmas. Upset about the idea of not being in total control of the rodents, Terry felt like breaking down. But she had to finish preparing dinner. Why was everything always on her shoulders? Why couldn't Eldon do exactly as she told him? Eldon did not want to snap another elastic red ribbon around the neck of a prairie dog. Eldon felt like heading to McCarthy's pub. Maybe if he said that his wife was giving their grown children prairie dogs for Christmas, they'd let him drink 1 beer in the bar. Maybe he should make a sign and hang it around his neck. That way he wouldn't have to explain. Come to think of it, the people in the bar really hadn't liked it when he opened his mouth to speak. He'd been called a mealy-mouthed tightwad and a bastard when he left 10% on top of the price of a Budweiser. The bartender had said that percentages wasn't what he was looking for when he served a man a Budweiser. Eldon looked towards the door that led to the kitchen, listening for his wife. Terry turned on her easy listening Christmas music and placed a tray of dinner rolls in the oven. She was thinking about not having her kids around for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Her daughters were going to spend those 2 days at their in-laws' places. Maybe that was okay, because Hanukkah was starting on the 25th of December, and Terry was secretly becoming a Jew. Well, pretending to be a Jew. Even Eldon didn't know. When Eldon was at his fellowship meetings at the Mennonite church, Terry drove to the synagogue on the other side of Boulder, attending conversations about what it meant to be Jewish and flirting with conversion classes. Didn't her adopted last name, Philisteinsdatter, say it all? It had that Nordic Jewish sound. Teary smiled and turned up the volume. There, she felt better. Eldon flipped the switch to the garage door and watched it slowly rise. He wasn't the only one who could see outside. Keith decided to leave his garage on 1046 Grant Street. Julie and Roy were continuing their heated argument. Their something's gotta happen by Monday night agreement hadn't quite worked out. Roy thought that celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary in advance would send them into a unified vision of the future. The "Babe, where do you see us in 13 years' time?" theme had bombed. He hadn't quite mastered the art of subtle persuasion. The banner above the bed had sent Julie into a tizzy and provoked a shouting match. It was now Saturday, and the pair of them was still grouchy. The Zen monk walked to the hospital. He'd been there quite a few times during his last years, living and dying in Longmont. There was just something about a hospital that intrigued him, and even more so if he wasn't a patient. Keith watched people entering and leaving through the lobby doors. Despite the cold lobby reminding him of a deceptively low-budget hotel, the humanity he witnessed touched him. He took in the vision of a thin man with droopy eyes in a wheelchair. He was being pushed by a striking candy striper towards the doors for a curbside pickup. Curious, Keith stood up and followed the wheelchair and the candy striper. He just felt that there was something there, a feeling of something good was going to happen if he followed the man in the wheelchair, pushed by a blonde candy striper. Outside, Gator Matcha gingerly seated himself in the Outback Oracle. Tirzah sat behind the wheel in her blonde wig. Keith slid into the back seat. "I'd like to see the Christmas lights," Gator said, "if you don't mind, Tirzah." He handed the candy striper 20 through the open door. Emery closed the door gently and waved. Tirzah jerked the car's gearbox into drive and pulled out of the driveway. A mountain lion flashed before the car's lights. It was heading north and moving quickly. The mountain lion had a prairie dog clamped in its jaws. Keith could have sworn that the prairie dog was wearing a red ribbon around its neck. Tirzah and Gator were staring at the space where the mountain lion had appeared. The car behind them honked its horn. "I didn't know that you were fond of Christmas lights, Gator," Tirzah finally said. "If it's not too much out of the way," Gator said hoarsely. "Are you sure you want to stay at the hotel?" Tirzah asked. "I got them to keep my room for me," Gator said. He'd sent Emery to pay his bill in time, extending his stay on the second floor. Keith picked up the book that was lying on the back seat. Under the Earth, The Grip of the Thriving Potato. He admired the title. He suspected the book might be the memoir of an elementary school teacher. However, he did not find it a suitable mantra for feminist literature that touched on surviving the Holocaust. It was so wrong. Keith couldn't resist. Using the light beaming down from the UFO that was tailing the Outback Oracle, Keith read a paragraph. "We shall not be recognized while this our Mother Earth is dying. The howling of each tortured and tagged species is entombed in the nutritive dirt below our feet. The wailing grows more intense with the woofing of the feminine moon power. We, the people of the halloumi, pure milk substance of the universe that we know as the Milky Way. Its real name is I Want It All. Say it. I want it all. We, as clumps of transient beings from the walls and woods of eternity, will never stand as not untraumatized. We have the blessing and the cleansing of trauma. Embrace it. Let us bleed clean the normalized metaphors. Let us stick those heartwarming leeches to the buttocks of our unified tribal identities. Prepare us, pan-global être, through my words of loving guidance, to emerge towards the sun under the protective umbrella of the unguarded, ethically challenged behavior that shapes our children into survivors. Cosmos, cosmos, cosmos. Chant it aloud. Cosmos, cosmos, cosmos." At that very moment, Keith thought the aliens overhead should immediately abduct Tirzah Pyrestone for crimes against prose. It was a very conscious thought. Keith's thought possessed no watery edges of subconscious thought. It was clear as day. Tirzah Pyrestone was a raving lunatic. This made Keith uncomfortable. He wanted to sit in the driver's seat. Gator startled. He'd been admiring the giant sled and prancing reindeer on Spencer Street until he noticed the old man sitting in the back seat. Was it the same spectre that had appeared in the Texas Roadhouse? The apparition did not seem to be the one and the same. No, this illusion was definitely not F. Scott Fitzgerald. Gator decided to take charge. "Speak, Moses!" Gator said loudly. "Gator!" Tirzah exclaimed, breaking hard. "Are you all right? You're shaking." "I charge you to answer me," Gator said forcefully to the back seat. He wanted answers. He wanted answers now. Moses was in the car. Keith decided to diffuse the situation. He had that easy charm of distraction. "Hey, man, I'm just looking for my notebooks. Have you seen them?" "I think you should lie down," Tirzah said. Gator had been taught that Yahweh was all-providing and ever-providing. Moses was surely being instructed by Yeva to chip away at some more rocks and produce hard copy. That must be why Moses was sitting in the back seat of the Outback Oracle. Maybe Gator could help Moses locate his notebooks. "Where should I look?" Gator finally said, as the blinking of the red and white Christmas lights illuminated and shaded his face. "I think that the Mennonites might know something," Keith said, reflecting in that absent-minded way of his. "Those goddamn Michiganers at it again," Gator exclaimed testily. "You wanted to see the Christmas lights, so we're looking at the Christmas lights," Tirzah snapped. "That's it. I'm taking you back to the hotel." She turned the car around. The UFO stayed put, hovering over the giant sled. As Tirzah drove away, Keith glanced back at the scene on Spencer Street. Then he looked at the two people in the front seat of the Outback Oracle. It appears, Keith thought with dissatisfaction, that the aliens don't want anything to do with these people. Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott and based loosely on facts, the work researches the case of the missing archive materials of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author. In real life, Keith's most important materials are actually still missing, and this might lead to a Mr. In-Between. Mr. In-Between is the title of a lost manuscript. Was Richard Brodigan really the basis for the main character? Will we ever know? But this particular podcast version of events attempting to retrieve the missing materials is fictional, of course. A returning theme in Routine Apparitions is old friends, the good kind. Routine Apparitions, Chapter 9, Keith revisits Naropa and an old friend. Keith Abbott was still sitting in the back seat of the Outback Oracle after Tirzah dropped Gator off at the Longmont Holiday Inn Express and Suites. She didn't bother to get out of the car. She watched as Gator turned and smiled dryly at her before he headed into the lobby. Gator had his own plans. He had thought up a lot of fresh ideas for the direct road to the nearest neighborhood, how to reach your inner artistic spirit during his stay in the hospital. And now he believed he had just spoken to Moses, who happened to be sitting in the back seat of Tirzah's car. Why, after a good breakfast in the breakfast room, Gator was sure that the next day was going to be filled with inspired writing. After debating with himself, Keith decided to stay with the option of the Outback Oracle. He wanted to visit Naropa. He hadn't been there in a long time. What did the campus look like now? Had it changed? Tirzah fiddled with her phone. She wanted to unwind. Being with Gator was tiresome when he fell into a pedantic phase, for instance, the subject of female subjugation, his go-to topic of conversation whenever he pandered his wares to women. Maybe she shouldn't have worn the blonde wig to pick him up from the hospital. Anyway, the clock was running, and they had yet to develop and perfect their collaboration. Gator's agent was determined to negotiate a different title. Tirzah wasn't sure what she thought about the rebranding. Leaving a Trace, Phantom Creator, a workbook for people challenged by procrastination. In the back seat, Keith found himself listening to Tirzah Pyrestone's voice. His driver was reviewing her audiobook demo. Tirzah is steeped in Jewish trauma, like an herbal teabag percolating supreme rebirth for all of humanity, leading them to arid land and safety under the canopy of open-armed Judaism. She takes you there via a long and rigid drink of grievous loss, whether you have experienced it or not. The rabbi's supreme gift is the transmission of seeds to grow degenerative flowers, discontinuance, and her American truth. The announcer finished introducing Tirzah. Over the car speakers, Keith heard Tirzah say, "God is real." She's a cult, Keith thought, as they braked for the stoplights on the diagonal. Keith glanced across the intersection. He saw the ghost of his 1953 Chevy truck in the opposite lane, heading north towards Longmont. Standing in the bed of the Chevy truck, Ernest Hemingway was strapped to the back of the cab. Ernest was wearing his big box and in possession of a fishing spear. As usual, Smitty was driving. Someone was lighting a cigarette next to Smitty. It was Michael Soule, riding shotgun. At last, the Rhino Ritz Detective Agency had heard Keith's plea. Zelda never dreamed of having a prairie dog as a pet, and she knew there was no way of getting around Teary. Nate had loaded up the cage in the back of their car. They were returning to their own home after the Mast early Christmas dinner. "Did you know you have to put them under anesthesia for any visit to the vet?" Flora messaged her sister. Zelda read the message aloud to her husband in the car. "She's nuts," Nate said, thinking of his mother-in-law. Nate had never dreamed of having a prairie dog as a pet. "Nate!" Zelda exclaimed. "Your mother, not your sister," Nate corrected himself. "We'll just let them go free after we pass Buck Rogers' ranch," Zelda said. Nate nodded, his eyes on the road. When Keith Abbott finally arrived at Naropa, it was well past 10:30 p.m. The campus was dark. He walked through the wall and into the main building. It was stripped of furniture. The building was empty. What had happened? Keith turned away and exited his old school where he had taught writing, poetry, and brushwork for 15 years. There it was, John Valia's black Plymouth Fury parked on the street. "Marzipan," Keith said, "my old friend." John stepped forward from the shadows. "It seems as if we met yesterday." John looked the same, but somehow not the same. He had on his Nestor Marzipan fedora hat, and not the gray beanie he wore when he was slowly dying of cancer. Keith smiled. He immediately felt better now that he had reconnected with his friend. "But we didn't meet yesterday," he said softly. "Abbott," John said, "we've got to talk. Everyone's talking, so why not we talk?" Keith liked that. Nestor Marzipan's undeniable logic. "Can I drive?" Keith asked. Nestor Marzipan tossed Keith the keys. "Kumasen, we might be entering a Russian novel." Keith drove the Plymouth Fury to a favorite old watering hole. John's car drove like a racehorse on amphetamines. "Park it anywhere," John instructed, looking at the parking lot. The parking lot was enclosed. "John, I didn't know you were expecting me to get creative," Keith said mildly. "Okay, then. Why not pull in next to that saucy little Toyota Camry?" John suggested. "That's really about roundabout anywhere," Keith replied. The two men sat down at the bar. "What will you have, Santa?" the bartender asked Keith. It was disconcerting how much of the population of Boulder was clairvoyant. A ghost had little chance to duck under cover. "I'll have a Hemingway special," John said, "and Abbott here needs a haircut." "One devil's haircut it is, coming right up," the bartender said. "Devil aside, do you know where I can get a haircut at this time of night?" Keith asked Nestor. "Don't worry, I know of a place," John smiled. Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott, the novel delves into the world of the missing archive materials of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author, after his death. So, what you are listening to here is a ghost story. In real life, Keith's most important materials are still missing, but, to be clear, this particular podcast version of events attempting to retrieve the missing materials is fictional, because otherwise certain people could become most undone. Therefore, it stands to reason to preemptively undo them out of compassion. You know, folks, if a poison pen letter writer lived next door to you, would you know it? Unlike authors aiming to be recognized for their work and creativity, these toxic underground writers direct the blame on others. Routine Apparitions, Chapter 10, Rhino Writs Out of Control. What do you really think happened? Teary asked Eldon, turning away from the screen. You can always count on God's helping hand, Eldon said automatically. It could have been very well Jesus who had helped the chief of police to foil the break-in at Dick's sporting goods store. The consensus is that the lost copies of Beloved are irretrievable, the newscaster was saying. DeSantis claims this is perfectly fine by him, stating, the main threat to our nation is exposing our children's eyes to historical violence in fine print. Eldon looked up, thinking about the idea of historical violence in fine print. He wasn't comfortable with banning books, but he also wasn't too uncomfortable about banning books. After all, he had been involved in a major literary heist in Longmont, Colorado. The thing is, he didn't want anyone to know about it. Not even Teary knew, and he couldn't tell her because of the Brotherhood Oath. And things were getting complicated and, unfortunately for him, about to get more complicated. Don't you think the hole in the wall is a little too big for a Mitsubishi Colt? Teary looked perturbed. Chief Noel cuffed those Floridian crooks darn quick after the alarm went off, Eldon said, focusing on the outcome of the event in the parking lot of Dick's sporting goods store. He always voted Democrat. It just doesn't seem like Rob DeSantis drove his car through the wall. The Mitsubishi doesn't have a dent in it. Teary was peeling herself a hard-boiled egg for breakfast before church. Teary was secretly registered as a Republican. The League of Republican Women Voters was an active tab on her Excel sheet. It was Aaron Bean behind the wheel, Eldon corrected his wife, watching the screen. They weren't even driving American, Teary said peevishly. She hated it when Eldon corrected her. Law enforcement detained Bean on a DUI and destruction of property, the newscaster read. While Bean claimed that it was the spirit of the crusade that stirred his blood to chase the truck with the men wearing the box in the back, Bean plans to contest the DUI charge. The newscaster turned to his colleague. Well, this is certainly the strangest story I've ever reported. What do you make of that, Bill? What about the books? Teary persisted. DeSantis swore that a man wearing a cardboard box harpooned the banned books they had collected from the school libraries. One clean sweep. Multiple copies of Toni Morrison's Beloved Spirit, just like that. Teary snapped her fingers. DeSantis must have been hallucinating, Eldon said, thinking again of the blue eyes and the young woman driving the Camaro. You just saw there was nothing on the surveillance video to support that kind of wild claim at the storage unit. Little did Eldon realize that soon he would be the one prone to hallucinations. Of course, DeSantis changed his story, and his lawyer is now saying that they had to go into the store to get some more bullets in the name of self-defense, Teary said, and frowned, against a man in a cardboard box. Paper, Eldon thought, can be dangerous. He startled. He didn't know where this thought came from. It just happened. They picked up the flowers at Longmont Florist before dropping Julie off at the Care Day for free dental work. Julie needed 3 fillings replaced, and they couldn't afford it. The Christmas initiative at Comfort Dental to benefit the community was a welcome relief. Roy hoped Julie would be less snappy after the fillings were replaced. In the driver's seat, Roy was worried. He didn't like being behind on the bills. In the case of the utility bill, he wasn't the only one in Longmont, Colorado, unable to pay the bill on time. The new system turned off the auto payment function, and now, like many others, he had to pay a $20 penalty fee on top of the outstanding amount, and to get this all straightened out, he had to go down to the billing office. But somehow the billing was now being processed through the state of Virginia. What else was going to go wrong in the world? In the back of the van, Blessing and Taylor were playing rock, paper, scissors. To Roy, seeing the kids playing rock, paper, scissors was very reassuring. Emery was standing by the curb outside the hospital with a cart on which to load the flowers. Roy and Blessing set the buckets holding the bouquets of flowers on the cart. Emery told Roy that her mom would drive Blessing back home. The girls pushed the cart into the hospital lobby. After making the rounds, Emery and Blessing sat down in a quiet corner of the hospital and waited for Mila. Blessing told Emery about the plan to spend time over the Christmas break at Carmen's house to learn bookkeeping. That's a good skill to have, Emery said encouragingly. How's your folder going? Not bad, Blessing said. I think. Blessing didn't have a clue what kind of money Emery was earning as a candy striper. What about you? I managed to set $500 aside, Emery said. My parents know about some of the jobs. So $500 was only part of the money Emery had earned. But it's your money, Blessing said. How much money did Emery have? Emery sighed. Here comes Mila. Mila took in the sight of her two friends. Hey, so how much did you ladies make today? We split the $50 from tips, Emery said, but we're giving the teddy bear to you for John. That's so sweet. Mila set a bag of donut holes down on the table. Blessing opened the bag. Some people are really sick, Mila blurted out as she sat down. Emery looked up from inspecting her donut hole. Like, yeah, we're in a hospital. Or do you mean sick like sick in the head? Yeah, like sick in the head. Mila explained that she had just dropped off Juanito at his grandmother's house. My kind of mother-in-law showed me this letter she got in the mail. Some asshole saying that she wasn't Jewish enough because she ate pork at her book club meeting. What? Blessing said. It's crazy, Mila said and rolled her eyes. Who wrote the letter? Emery asked. Not signed, no return address, Mila said. Did she eat pork at the book club meeting? Blessing asked. Not that she remembers, Mila said. Is she Jewish? Emery asked. Yes, but she's not actively involved in Jewish things. Tristan's dad is not Jewish, Mila said. So, why would someone send that letter to her? Blessing asked. She went to the meeting, right? Emery asked. She went to the meeting. She might have eaten pork because she eats pork anyway. But the strangest thing is that the meeting that she was supposed to be at where she was also supposed to be eating pork never happened. What? Blessing said. It's like the date of the meeting was not the date of the actual meeting. I don't get it, Emery said. You mean the letter said that she was at a meeting that never took place and that she was eating pork at that meeting? Blessing said. Bingo, Mila sat back. That is just too weird, Blessing said. Yeah, Lilith doesn't want to go to the police, but she's kind of freaked out. Sounds like something Donna would do, Emery said. Yeah, it does sound like something Donna would do, Blessing said. That's one crazy bitch, Mila said, thinking of the teenager who had gotten suspended for insisting that the French teacher had offered everyone a drop of absinthe in class. The French teacher didn't know much French and didn't make her students do anything other than recite verb conjugations. You want to know something really strange? Emery said. What? Blessing said. There was this guy here, Emery said. She described Gator Matcha. Thin, droopy kind of guy. He asked me to extend his hotel room. You went to his hotel room? Mila asked. Not with him. He was in the hospital when I went to the hotel to extend the stay so that when he got out, he still had his hotel room, Emery explained. What was wrong with him? Blessing asked. They ran some tests, but they couldn't find anything. He got better after a few days. Maybe it was something he ate. So what was strange? Mila said. His hotel room. You went into his hotel room? Mila asked. Yeah, because he asked me to get something. What was it? Blessing asked. Emery hesitated. Some kind of medication. Medication my ass, Mila said. I bet you was drugs. Theoretically, it's all the same thing, Emery said. But there was a lot of it, and a pile of cash. What did the dope look like? Came in medicine bottles. Did you take any? No way, Emery said. I just picked up what he asked me to bring him. Did he tip you? Yeah. How much? 1,000. But you said you saved 500 in cash, Blessing said. 500 plus 1,000, Emery admitted. But what was strange then about his room? Mila asked. Gator had some big cardboard cutouts of people in his room. Gator? Mila exclaimed. I know who you're talking about. Was he with some senior chick in a blonde wig? Yeah, a flat-chested Dolly Parton. She showed up when he was discharged. Blonde wig? Blessing exclaimed. I bet that's Tirzah Pyrestone. Mila, Emery said, not interested in hearing about Tirzah Pyrestone again. You didn't drive here by yourself, did you? Relax. My brother was with me when I dropped off Juanito, Mila said. After their night of bar crawling in Boulder, Keith Abbott and John Valia climbed back into the Plymouth Fury. It was now parked in front of the El Cerrito barber shop on San Pablo Avenue. Between the hours of 3, held up the 8-track tape that was next to him. After that short stop before the bridge, the poets were feeling energized. Creedence Clearwater Revival, John said, and pushed the 8-track tape into the tape player. Well, take me back down to cool water flow, y'all. Let me remember things I love, Lord, stopping at the log where the catfish bite. I don't ever recall that we went catfishing before, John said diplomatically, but barefoot girls dancing in the moonlight does jar my memory. In Monterey, as Keith Abbott and John Valia walked into Beer Springs, the foghorn sounded. The fog was definitely coming in. Once the fog cleared, you could see Persephone Abbott sitting at her little table in Amsterdam. Her hair was turning white, and the pattern of white streaks through the gray hair matched the pattern Keith's hair had undergone over the years leading up to his death. Persephone had made a promise to her father as he lay dying in Longmont, Colorado, that she would find him. Persephone and Keith once wrote a novel together in Monterey. And then the fog comes, Persephone said to Keith. Persephone was 5 then. And when the fog clears, everything is different, Keith said to his daughter, who sat by his knee. Yes, Persephone said with satisfaction. At his desk, Keith punched the keys on his typewriter. In 1973, the typewriter made a heavy popping sound that Persephone always liked to hear. She also liked the sound of the foghorn. Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. Written by Persephone Abbott, the novel retrieves some of the actual files that still exist, as well as dive into the missing archival materials of Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author. In real life, Keith's most important materials are actually still missing, but, to be clear, this particular podcast version of events attempting to retrieve the missing materials is fictional. Yet it has to be said that the story entitled This Music Can Be Heard in Your Area Only by Keith Kumasen Abbott is fairly representative of his true life. The story was transcribed from an audio recording, the only existing version, for the purposes of this novel. Let's pick up where we left off. Keith has called up the Rhino Ritz Detective Agency to find his missing manuscripts, and they broke into Dick's sporting goods store instead because Ernest Hemingway took a shine to a new model of fishing spear. Don is desperately trying to imagine a world without his Mennonite wife, who has been secretly plotting to convert to Judaism, and his daughters are not pleased with their Christmas presents, pairs of live prairie dogs. Tirzah and Gator are continuing to drum up business with their psychobabble, and Candace, the ex-Mormon, is claiming to be a protector of the spirit world. So, folks, it feels like it's time for a break. Let's detour in a short while and listen to a background story to this novel. Routine Apparitions, Chapter 11, This Music Can Be Heard in Your Area Only by Keith Kumasen Abbott. Gator was safely back in his hotel room at Holiday Inn Express and Suites in Longmont, Colorado. For breakfast, he had selected a turkey patty and a blueberry muffin, and then he poured not quite hot water over a bag of herbal tea. On his way back to his room, he grabbed a banana. According to his doctor, Gator wasn't supposed to drink any coffee for a while because it weakened his organs. Gator was still pondering if it had been the cup of coffee that had made him so ill. He felt caffeine traumatized. On second hand, maybe he was just lightly bruised by caffeine and he might need to tone down the drama. Maybe his doctor was Mormon. As for food, theoretically, Gator was a vegetarian. He usually punished his sweet tooth by abstaining from sugar. This way he kept that gaunt look about him. The stay in the hospital had deregulated him, and Kim, the breakfast bar attendant who would make him an egg white omelet, wasn't working that morning. Gator didn't want to make a fuss. Truth be told, he still wasn't feeling much like his old self yet. Besides, he had a task to tackle, and that was to find Moses' notebooks, as well as write a masterpiece himself while at the hotel. Gator wasn't sure where he wanted to start, but he thought a meditation with his charoite crystal was a good opening move. Gator settled on the floor, surrounded by life-sized cardboard cutouts of humans, which he used to enact role-play in therapy. This practice was a significant part of Chapter 7 in the direct road to the nearest neighborhood, How to Reach Your Inner Artistic Spirit. He placed his banana next to him on the carpet. He activated his meditation music and set a timer on his phone. Maybe his agent was right. Maybe Leaving a Trace, Phantom Creator, a workbook for people challenged by procrastination, was a better title. Then he reached into his shirt and pulled out a leather pouch. He extracted a medicine bottle with a pharmacy sticker on it and popped one of Buck's pills. Closing his eyes, he inhaled deeply. He felt his lungs expand as the hotel air was sucked up through his nostrils. He noted the bleach odor entering his skull, and he exhaled through his mouth. After 10 breaths, the pill started working, and it was working really well with the Holiday Inn bleach smell. Gator felt himself float off the floor. Almighty Creator, Gator prayed, I give thanks to you. Help me to help Moses. Show me the way to the missing notebooks. I feel your power and inspiration. I recognize that you also sent F. Scott Fitzgerald to cross my path. I am humbled. Then Gator's mind reminded him of the all-encompassing presence of his big sister. He was now tripping back to 1964, and his sister had just beaten the crap out of him because he had borrowed her hula hoop to capture the neighbor's pair of Dobermans, and that had been the end of the hula hoop. His eyes still closed. Gator frowned. This was not the association he wanted to make on the quest to find Moses' notebooks. Why was he thinking of Shirley? Gator concentrated hard on channeling a vision of the future. He then heard Shirley's voice, and she was hopping mad. She was in an altercation with Buck Rogers. Something had been badly organized. This reminded Gator that he was supposed to be picked up that afternoon for a session with Buck Rogers. He was also invited later that week for Christmas dinner at the ranch. Buck claimed that he had been transported from the past to the future. This was one of Buck's trauma-induced delusions that Gator was treating. The future was now. Gator opened his eyes and reached into his pouch. He checked the date on the medicine bottle. It read 2064, so it hadn't yet expired. Out back and way off the grid, Lolly was reading another one of Keith Kumasen Abbott's lost manuscripts. He was using blackout curtains in the cabin for cover and had left his phone in the secret safety box that a survivalist buddy of his had built. Lolly drove a 1978 Chevrolet Scottsdale that he managed to keep in good running order. Because of that extra muffler on the truck, Lolly could disappear off the grid when he wanted. Lolly settled down to another adventure with Keith and Keith's friend John, who figured in the story as Jimmy. As Ted Berrigan said in 1979, Keith Kumasen Abbott is America's #1 underground writer. And Lolly took that quote to heart. Keith was his guy. He owned him. This music can be heard in your area only by Keith Kumasen Abbott. Part 1. The Music. So I was putting the money and the receipts in the safe, and she was in the cubby hole taking 5. She took off this chain she had around her motorcycle jacket. It went around the waist. I wasn't even sure who Jimmy T was talking about. I had glimpsed a new waitress in leathers, but only once. Blonde, pale, miniskirt, torn stockings. Just you were down on the floor next to the safe? Yeah, and she looped the chain around the tube shelves up high, the metal ones, and I had the safe open in the floor. She hung there, that jacket riding up, everything riding up. She spun around, looking over her shoulder, and then she started making this sound. I leaned out, looked over the edge of the booth to peek in the 2 doorways. Someone was mopping the floor in the kitchen. I tapped the bindle against the tabletop. Jimmy was staring at the busted miniature jukebox on the wall beside us, a slot for the nickel, dime, or quarter. This music can be heard in your area only. So, what was the sound? If she hadn't made that noise, I think I could have forgotten it. Maybe. And now you can't. You told your wife? No. Maybe you ought to. She understands stuff like that. I mean, by now, she knows. She worked here. She knows the scene. Jimmy took the bindle out of my hand, and he opened and tapped the paper until some rocks fell out on the formica. He looked at his reflection in the chrome of the miniature jukebox. I wasn't gonna allow myself to do that anymore. Imagine, fantasize someone else. Now he was talking more to his reflection than to me. That's the one thing, the only good thing I got out of therapy. No fantasizing during sex. For 3 years now. But if we do it, I will. I won't be able to help myself, and then I'm back where I started. Part 2. Hanging out at Gigi's. Jimmy left the restaurant to drop the bindle off at a friend's house. He was shaken up, Women were no small thing in Jimmy's life. When I first met him, he was safe in a cushy job at a private school in Santa Barbara, teaching the kids of the upper crust how to throw a pot. He had a kind wife and a bright kid and an income from a modest but growing career in ceramics. He begged them all for a randy little senior who yarded him off to New Mexico and screwed his brains out on an adobe roof until she got bored and fobbed him off on a girlfriend. Took a month, tops. Jimmy was Italian and his blood run that way, like splat. Face first into passion and tragedy. I can joke about it because Jimmy joked about it. If anything, he was more honest than I was, more honest about everything. Knew everyone and everything too. Jimmy was a guy who you could talk to about who was doing the horizontal bop with who, about his old buddy Robert Arneson's latest sculpture at the De Young Museum, or how much he got off on really expensive Milanese slingbacks. Whatever your Jones or hang-ups, Jimmy was there riding shotgun with you. He hung with the scum and skied with the Rockefellers. Jimmy had more friends than Mother Teresa. But this was serious. His second wife and kids meant a lot to him. When Jimmy said he didn't feel like going home, we agreed to meet back at Gigi's and talk things over. Our Coke dealer's place was in the middle of what used to be middle-class Oakland. This was about 1985 and the end of the good times 80s. Only we didn't know that then. It was still a real neighborhood, meaning that everyone knew your business but minded their own. As for Gigi, well, hard to paint Gigi. She was a mix of career and commerce. She was still a gawky kid at age 30 with a kind of scratchy, cracked voice. She was always saying, "God, gag me with a spoon, why don't ya?" Stuff like that. And she was still kind of starry-eyed about her ambitions. Her master plan was to maintain her mortgage with her graphic design money and build a client list, and at the same time pay off a lot up in Oregon with her toot profits, sell the Oakland place, and retire at 35. With alimony money from her ex, she converted an old barn beside her Oakland house into a studio. That was her day job. Locals were used to seeing advertising clients coming and going at all hours, so when Gigi drifted further into product, no big change. Her studio was where Jimmy and me were often parked at the layout table, looking at our reflections and tapping glass. For us, it was like back in the old days, gossiping about art, who was hot, new scandals, except our kids were mostly taking care of themselves, and our wives understood our old careers. I still don't know what we were doing there, except devoting our after hours to challenging the notion that we were too close to old. Never saying it that way, of course, but saying it by having time to kill. Part 3, Delton. That afternoon, Gigi had to run, so she turned us over to Delton Conger. He rented the basement of her house and acted as protection. Delton was a special events setup guy for the University of California at Berkeley. He appreciated Gigi since she was good for reduced rent and wholesale flake. Basically, Delton was around most afternoons because of seniority and gross feather bedding. If asked, he said, "I got a beeper if they need me to earn my money." Delton liked his blow crusty and his jazz low, Wes Montgomery and George Benson and Stanley Turrentine. He packed a 9, and he didn't make any trouble for anyone. Easy to get along with. Nice and easy, he used to say. And if everything did not stay mellow, then his voice would get lower, and he'd say, "Now, let's be rational." And that was all that was needed. So while Delton and us were easing into the evening on a one-on-one with a Martell back, Jimmy T got to telling his story again. "Hey now, I've seen that young Justine," Delton agreed. "Yeah, I was once picking up some of this and that with someone from the restaurant." Delton sipped his Martells real slow, and we waited for his judgment. He shrugged and said, "She looked at me like I was 10 inches of trouble and she'd like some of both." This was not exactly what Jimmy T wanted to hear. It wasn't a big help in promoting Jimmy's own fantasy, so Delton went back to inspecting his brandy a swirl or two before he changed the subject. "Justine got a rich daddy and mommy to serve that attitude?" he asked. I'm not sure about that, but she's middle class with sugar-frosted flakes. They may be up to their first BMW. Delton hummed. "So you tried replacement therapy?" Delton nodded towards the north side of town. "There's the Pussycat Theater. It's cheaper than shrinks." It was a sound, not just it'd have to be the same or better. A picture won't do. Delton always respected how out front Jimmy was, and he once remarked to me, "The man has no choice but to talk it out. Got that Stanford education for vocabulary and a full blown-out career long enough to fill out a 20-page therapy resume. With these artists for soulmates, the man has to tell new kinks every day just to keep them happy and interested." Delton turned back to Jimmy. "Okay, let's take it from the top. Did you tell your wife? Louise would understand, right?" Jimmy nodded yes to the last part. Then he shook his head, indicating that Delton's words weren't the answer. Jimmy chopped a fresh line and regarded Delton for a moment. Delton only looked him in the eyes until Jimmy clearly tried to think about something else. I wish whoever brought Justine over here hadn't done that, Jimmy said. I was thinking that about 2 seconds after I first caught that young woman's act, Delton said, and poured another finger of Martell for Jimmy, and added soberly, there are some careless winds around that girl. Part 4. Mental Health. A few days later, I stopped by the restaurant early for me, that is. I had an 8 a.m. blood test at Kaiser. Jimmy T was across the street at Sally Mendadino's lounge after his morning produce run. Jimmy liked to rehash the Chronicle sport pages with the other neighborhood salami sellers. Jimmy drew me to one side and started working over the chains, the leathers, the sound. Jimmy, buddy, let's cut to the chase. The wife is looking at you funny. Jimmy made helpless gestures. How else is she supposed to look at me? I'm not putting out for her. Okay, preventative maintenance. Have you run one of your waitresses by her so she knows you're not bonking the hired help? She beat me to it. Came nosing around on Wednesday afternoon when I was picking up the wine on my regular run. Okay, pragmatic solution. You think, doing it with the lights or minimize the chances of fantasy, or I waved at the bar mirror. The phone rang and the bartender grabbed the call. Take the missus to one of the motels by the airport with mirrors on the ceiling. Mirrors above the headboard. I mean, if you got your eyes open at all, no matter where you look, it's just you and just the wife. Jimmy Telefero, the bartender announced operatically while aiming the receiver at Jimmy and mouthing, your wife. Jimmy shrugged. She's checking up on me. He put his hand out for the phone, and when he got done talking, he looked aside and gave out a sigh. Jimmy, it's getting so your friends don't want to talk to you about this endless rerun. This is lust, not love, right? Try another angle, as the actor said to the bishop. Maybe you should put it to, what's her name again? Justine Williams. She'd go for it, right? Buy an 8-nose ball of candy and some bud. After her next shift, tell Justine you need help on a pickup at the Carne con Carne Hotel. Jimmy had a laugh. The Carne Court Motel on East 14th was a pit stop for the Vice Squad, the kind of place where ex-priests and district managers for electric companies were found dead of heart attacks with companions for witnesses. Or borrow a motorcycle jacket and buy a dog chain and ask Louise if she wants to help you with a project at the restaurant around midnight. What's she's going to say? No, I only do outcalls for my part-time lovers? Jimmy didn't respond. He just sat there under his little straw pork pie hat, resigned and distracted and rubbing his 2-day-old beard. I would have left it with anyone else, but the point of being Jimmy's friend was that you were allowed to go all the way out on a limb. So I went, you Catholics sin good, don't you? Sin then. Don't burn in some mental hell. Hey, don't mess with these, Jimmy pretended to be insulted. Mental hells are my art form. Besides, it's not our agreement. I can't perpetuate these fantasies, and that's why we got into therapy in the first place. Jimmy downed his brandy. Oh man, if she hadn't made that noise. Hey, he announced, 8:52 and my wife's back checking on me, and I'm on my 3rd drink. Have I got a problem? No, everybody at the bar yelled, and they all laughed. One gray-bearded man muttered into his drink, non ha un problema. He grinned and brought Jimmy around. This have I got a problem? No routine was a ritual at Sally's lounge, but only among the neighborhood Italians. If you had a crisis that could be publicly entertaining, somebody bought you a drink. Part 5. Fresh bruises at Molo's. Molo's had originally been a chop suey place with a barbershop next door. In the 1970s, the restaurant changed into a rib pit dubbed La Originale. When that failed, some of Jimmy's hip friends bought the building, and they kept its sign, but a red Mother's was spray-painted graffiti style above La Originale by a kid from the California School of Art Design only a few blocks north. Jimmy was hired to manage the joint, and except for a few pros to run the grill, he never bothered to dip into any other talent pool than art students. At Molo's, everyone knew everyone else, shared apartments and or slept with everyone else. They doped and owed money to everyone else. They parked their cars in the same no parking zone and had the same outstanding traffic warrants. Like they say, just one big happy family. So when Justine slid into the seat across from me in my booth, I only got to say hello before she corrected my pronunciation. Justine, like Rin Tin Tin. Woof. She practiced panting. Then after a hair toss, she added a little breathily, have you seen Jimmy? No, I am waiting for him too. Except for her mirrored shades, she was in her street runaway look, simpatico with other art student fashion statements. A little of her history had come my way from Jimmy's staff. After only one semester, Justine turned terminally hip, dropped classes, outraged about how the art world sucked. I imagined Justine hanging from the tube shelving in Jimmy T's cubicle, her hands wrapped up in her dog chain. The image was sleazy enough to merit a U-turn through Jimmy's fantasy to make sure it wasn't mine too. But nah, I never really longed for quality time with milk carton kids. Justine looked out the window and jumped up. There's Gigi. Two dudes in knitted caps in the booth across from us, and even the waitress turned to look, and so did I, although I had seen Gigi lots of times. Then Justine plopped down. I wondered what the big deal was. Shit, one dude said. Her ass ain't candy. Mine is, and you know it, murmured Justine as she bent over her cherry coke. With her middle finger she lowered her mirrored shades down her nose and hoovered on the straw. I had to smile, but then she raised her eyes to check my reaction. Her whites were bloody. Someone had given her a smack, a good one, and the violet eyeshadow under her left eyebrow was really a fresh bruise. Part 6. Burb Refugee. Justine acted like she had something on Jimmy T, but she couldn't figure out quite what to do with it. Every time she got near Jimmy, her face turned thoughtful, sorting out her options. It was so naive, it was like watching a pop-up menu on a Mac. Justine was in such a rush for something spectacular as a Berg refugee, she couldn't match the low-life credentials of Molo's regulars, not in a scene where the morning fry cook was an ex-aerospace engineer fresh off a 3-year tour of duty, as well as a speed freak and a street guitarist. Talk about commitment to art. He'd sacrificed almost all his teeth and gums while pursuing the perfect blues lick for total strangers. During a party at some mutual friends who stored Justine's stuff, she showed me her portfolio after it finally registered that I wrote reviews for Art Week. Gigi told me the name of an art rep and where to send my slides, but I never heard back. For a moment, in her puzzlement, Justine's face seemed even younger, like the face of some girl at a mall who was about to leave town, maybe for good. She wasn't really thinking anything out. She was sensing away like a deer standing at the edge of the road. Part 7. Late for the party. The two were dressed like Pacific Gas and Electric guys checking the basement for a gas leak. They blindsided Delton and pistol-whipped him. A Black Hawk rugger in one ear got his promise to be quiet, and then they roped him to a big vent pipe in the bathroom. Jimmy and me and Gigi and her 2-year-old kid were upstairs with nothing much more than a beer and small talk. Labor Day coming up. I had developed an allergic reaction to cocaine, so I was just socializing. Gigi might have been on lewds because she struck me as syrupy around the edges, but that only mattered later when she stayed moderately calm. The first PG&E guy, the short guy, had a clipboard, and I knew something was wrong. Most meter readers had electronic gizmos, but the tall one followed with a gun, and when they saw it was only us four, they looked surprised. As for us, we were hoping Delton was alert downstairs. They checked the bathroom before they gave us our instructions. Jimmy and me lay down on the hardwood floor, and Gigi put her kid on the sofa. When the kid cried, it didn't help. The guys were edgy and wired. There was a moment when it seemed likely that we'd get one apiece in the head. They were threatening Gigi, even after she opened the safe in the fireplace hearthstone, badgering her for all the coke and all the money. Gigi never held back, but they still smacked her and tossed her around. Justine walked in just then. I snuck a peek as the short guy told her to lock the door and stand against it, but he was exasperated and jacked up. When he caught me looking, he jumped over and put the muzzle to my left ear. He breathed 3 times, real slow. The tall one filled up Gigi's fanny pack with cash and bindles worth over an ounce. He tossed it to the short guy. Then the tall one grabbed Justine and jerked her arm up behind her back. She cried out. He said they were taking her with them, and if we called the heat, they would do her. They didn't know that the vent pipe in Delton's bathroom was disconnected and lifted right out of its fitting. Delton crawled out of his front window and stayed under the porch just in time to see Justine and the tall one walk by. Delton stayed in hiding until the short guy came hurrying out, carrying Gigi's fanny pack. As he opened the stolen PG&E van, Delton stepped out and shot him twice, first in the back and then in the chest as he spun around. The van peeled out, and Delton lifted the fanny pack off the dead guy and walked into Gigi's as cool as could be. Delton ordered Gigi to ditch any paraphernalia and for us to follow him down to his studio. There he handed the pack to me and told me to split. Out the back door, down the alley, walk slow. And he repeated the walk slow part. I left as Delton was explaining how it was him who got held up, not Gigi, and she and Jimmy and the kid were in the studio the whole time. It wasn't until I was in the alley, trying to remember the nearest payphone to call a cab, when I realized I was holding a major felony stash with enough money to prove I was a dealer. That's when my legs started shaking. Delton later said that Justine split off from the tall one and got into the passenger seat on her own. so we agreed she was late to the party and was supposed to be inside with us when they came through the door. She fucked up, and Jimmy and me heard that in her cry of relief, like she deserved it when the guy ratcheted her arm. And then there was that do-her remark. Anyone with brains would know that a dealer was not going to call the police, and that do-her was for Justine, like a little French pastry thrown in for the thrill. Not shooting her was hard for Delton when she broke free of the tall one's arm lock and hopped into the passenger seat. Up until then, Delton was holding his fire, thinking she was a hostage, and he almost lost his temper. By the time Delton and us got around to rehashing the rip-off, a week had passed and everything had turned out bad. Justine had been found dead in a closet, dangling from a coat hook in an abandoned house. The Molos regulars got a glimpse of her appearance at the funeral. Paul Williams was a data computer analyst for Southern Pacific, and Maud Williams was a part-time aide for a local museum. They were stunned, guilty, and afraid. Justine had been stringing them along that she was still taking art classes, and they had been footing her monthly bills. Gigi moved to Oregon, freaked out for the safety of her kid and herself. She'd been inside a bubble, thinking she was surrounded by friends, and pushing product was a lucrative sideline like playing the stock market. We were all inside that bubble, really, some of us much longer than her. So what was I doing over there when I didn't even snort anymore? I mean, you stick with and are stuck with your friends, but not so you get killed for their habits. I don't know what I was thinking of. I couldn't even blame Jimmy. And a month after Justine died, Jimmy T got diagnosed with lymphoma and went through chemo, followed by radiation. He never returned to Molos. The doctor said no way. Too much stress, too many brandies and coffees in the a.m. But before his diagnosis, Jimmy and Louise were getting along fine. One afternoon at Sally's lounge, Jimmy danced off his bar stool. "Hey, so I don't need fantasies for sex anymore with my old lady." And he turned to the other juicers and yelled, "No problema, no?" And all the other barflies laughed and said, No problem. And then before anyone else could do it, I set Jimmy up with his favorite cognac. Later, when he had a little buzz coming on, he said he wished there was a better end for fantasies. But the thing is, Jimmy said, near as I can figure, there really isn't one. If they are strong enough, burial is the only way. Lolly sighed. He had almost gone to the January 6th insurrection, but something had stopped him. Now Trump was coming back for a second term. This might just be Lolly's chance to recoup his losses. Lolly put down the manuscript and opened up a pack of hot dogs. Hi, you are listening to Routine Apparitions, a fictional novel in blog form which is available on Blogspot. In this multi-genre work, Persephone Abbott mixes original materials of her father, Keith Kumasen Abbott, the Zen monk and author, and examines the case of his missing archive materials. Who out there knows what happened to the notebooks and manuscripts? Or, where did his correspondence go after his death in Longmont, Colorado? Let's pick up where we left off. You just listened to the short story set in Oakland, California, where Keith recounted a few of the adventures he experienced during the era when he heavily socialized while on cocaine. This was before he became a Zen monk and did whatever Zen monks do. Persephone has heard the rumor that they play cards using chi and get tanked up on brandy. Keith never confirmed this. Maybe he talks about this in one of his missing notebooks. Plus, in the last chapter, you finally met Lolly, the no-show Mennonite. Now let's head out of the 1980s and back to Christmas 2024. We've got more Mennonites, a secret Jew, prairie dogs, a possible Moses sighting, Mormons, aliens, a confused therapist/guru, the ghost of Gertrude Stein, one of Keith's own early published poems, and, of course, bowls of oatmeal. Let's stop this list now before Persephone throws the kitchen sink at this chapter. That is, if she hasn't already done so. Routine Apparitions, Chapter 12, The Penis Poem. Eldon woke up on Boxing Day. He opened his eyes and discovered that he was hungry. He also discovered, checking his phone, that it was quite early, earlier than he was accustomed to rising. What time had he gone to bed? He remembered coming home from the Christmas service after the community luncheon that was served to the needy and lonely. Teary had volunteered both of them for kitchen duty since their own children were not coming home for Christmas Day. He remembered calling Zelda and trying to get a hold of Flora. Had he talked to Flora? Eldon lay in his bed with Teary next to him. She was still fast asleep. He felt confused. He recalled the words of Pastor Brandy's sermon on the coming of Jesus. Pastor Brandy had quoted the biblical passages from Ezekiel. Eldon liked remembering words. The importance of the coming of the Savior of the world is not to be understated, Pastor Brandy had preached. As we celebrate the birth of Jesus, let us remember the words of Ezekiel. I looked and saw an immense cloud with flashing lights and emitting a bright light. The center of the cloud glowed like hot metal. Here Ezekiel recognizes the core, the everlasting life, the rock, the fundament, and the coming of Jesus to save mankind. We put our trust in the Lord and His only Son. We believe in His presence and love. Jesus has been born this day and will come again. Amen. How come Eldon could recall the exact words of Pastor Brandy, yet couldn't recollect if he had talked to Flora? And then there was that dream. The dream about an alien spaceship. Eldon was sure that this was the second time he dreamt about the aliens and the spaceship, but this time Eldon dreamt he was walking down Main Street and whistling Don't Worry, Be Happy with the aliens. Strangely enough, all his alien friends were named John. Eldon never used to dream of aliens. He didn't really like this turn of events, and he decided not to mention it to Teary. He silently slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen. He stood in the front of the coffee machine that was prepped to make chicory coffee. Eldon just wanted regular coffee. It was Boxing Day, gosh darn it, and he wanted regular coffee. It was also 4 a.m. Eldon opened the refrigerator and stared at the plate of latkes under saran wrap. Had that strange Pyrestone woman dropped off the plate of potato latkes? Eldon sighed. He went into the garage and put on a pair of overalls, the ones he used to shovel snow, but there was hardly any snow. He also put on his winter boots and gloves. As the garage door slowly opened, Eldon released the remaining prairie dogs from their cages. They darted off into the darkness, festive in their red ribbons. Maybe he should have taken the red ribbons off the prairie dogs. What did it matter, Eldon thought. Truth was, he didn't much like prairie dogs. He rubbed his head, feeling pretty out of it, and reckoned that he'd feel better after breakfast at the Waffle House. A coffee and a real conversation with God would do wonders. Trust me, Mila said to Blessing, she's wilder than you and me put together. Do you think there's anything between her and this Gator person? Blessing asked. No. Have you seen the man? Mila scoffed. But she could get herself into real trouble, you know. Yeah, but her dad's the chief of police, Blessing whispered. Aunt Carmen interrupted them. You girls doing okay? I thought it went well today, so I need you to come back tomorrow, and we'll review and maybe continue. Carmen looked at the girls. If you agree. Mrs. Garcia, I would love to come again. You're a great teacher, Blessing said. Mila agreed. Good, Carmen was satisfied. Mila, Tristan is here to pick you up. Can you drop off Blessing? Yes, Mila sighed. I can't wait to get my license. Only 2 more weeks. She turned to Blessing. Then we can make some plans. I was thinking we should take that judo class. Why? Blessing stopped in her tracks. Because, Mila said, you heard of that girl that was nearly sex trafficked? Is Emery coming too? Blessing immediately asked. She better, Mila said. Gator was watching Buck Rogers carefully. Buck was eating a bowl of oatmeal. Last night's party had gone on so long that Gator didn't make it back to his room at the Longmont Holiday Inn and Suites. Mrs. Buck Rogers was also eating a bowl of oatmeal. In fact, all of the guests from the party were in the ranch's dining room eating bowls of oatmeal. No one was complaining about the oatmeal. Raisins? Mrs. Buck asked, holding up the bowl next to her. The party had gotten out of control about the time they were seated in the safari jeep, being driven out over a large stretch of Rambo Ranch. It was beautiful under the dark blue sky and sparkling stars, but Buck's guests were cold. No one had anticipated spending Christmas looking for Moses' lost notebooks in a safari jeep. You see them? Buck asked Gator, who was sitting beside him. Buck was drunk and driving erratically. You see Moses' tablets out here? Buck, Gator said, I could have been mistaken. Maybe it wasn't Moses. Gator was beginning to regret telling his story about seeing Moses. You son of a bitch. I know it wasn't Moses in the back of the Outback Oracle. It's you who can't figure things out, you punk shrink. Keith Abbott. That's who was in the back of the Outback Oracle. Buck braked hard. Keith Kumasen Abbott. Buck brought out a pistol from inside his jacket and fired a shot into the air. That was a mountain lion. He gestured to the right of the safari jeep. Gator recoiled. Keith Abbott? Gator asked blankly. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Yeah, the Soto Zen monk. Buck restarted the jeep. He wears white robes and has a beard. You Jews apparently call him Moses. Moses was a Soto Zen monk? Gertrude Stein asked politely. Mrs. Buck Rogers shivered in her beaver pelts. Darling, she said to Buck, I think we should abandon the search for Moses' lost tablets. There couldn't possibly be anything left to ban, of importance that is, and besides, you could ask Lolly to track down those tablets if you are really serious. Both Mr. and Mrs. Miscavige made a mental note. Who was Lolly, and what exactly could he supply on short notice? At least, Buck muttered under his breath as he wrenched the wheel. Those two Scientologists aren't Mormons. Those two are only after spaceships and thetans. Buck didn't want to address the subject of possible alien life. Buck reached over and selected a grenade out of the glove compartment. He pulled the pin and threw it heroically into the distance. Buck had a good arm. Everyone sat silently and watched the grenade explode. It was almost like the 4th of July in Colorado, except colder. Gator was becoming ever more perplexed about Buck's tendency towards noisy acts of violence. Was it because he had attachment problems? Was it feeding his whimsical ideas about having incurable ADHD? Did Buck think he was going to get another medal for valiance? Buck was tired of all the yakking. He hated listening to the dumb stories and witnessing the self-righteous behavior, and all that on Christmas. Buck felt that the grenade was the best way to get everyone back on track. He had instructed his staff to prepare the eggnog in the bowling alley. After the grenade, it was time to return to the ranch, where everyone was already assigned to a team. Mrs. Buck Rogers with Mr. Miscavige, Buck with Mrs. Miscavige. Gator was paired with Gertrude Stein. You haven't heard of Keith Kumasen Abbott, have you? Gertrude asked Gator while they waited for Mrs. Miscavige to finish her turn. She was on her last throw and 5 pins remained in place. Gertrude watched Mrs. Miscavige gracefully slide to the left in her bowling shoes. Amazing. You were lucky to see Keith. I've been looking for him. I represent the Rhino Ritz Detective Agency. Gator still believed he'd seen Moses. Why are you looking for Keith Abbott? He asked. We've been hired by him to find his lost manuscripts. How come you can't find him? That is a very good question, Gertrude replied. Gator put 2 and 2 together as he considered that Buck was victim to delusions. Gator now suspected that Keith Kumasen Abbott was playing the middleman and had claimed Moses' lost notebooks as his own work. It was a cover-up. By the time everyone was spooning up their morning oatmeal at 3 in the afternoon, Gator had a plan. But first, he needed a ride back to the hotel. Mr. and Mrs. Miscavige politely declined his request. Keith, Michael Soule said, your daughter went out on a limb for you. The evening was advancing in Beer Springs. Yeah, John Valia jumped into the story. You know she read your poem, My Penis, on YouTube? Keith thought about this. Which one? The one in Dump Truck, Ethel said, referring to the 1967 publication, and set down fresh beers in front of all 3 of them. That was a fairly early penis poem, Keith said. It had a certain familiarity, John said. He quoted the poem. This could be a long poem, depending on how I feel. But if I feel one way or the other, it wouldn't matter. Here I'll tell you what I've heard said. You bastard, you shouldn't be allowed on the street. Why'd she do it? Keith asked. She needed 13 signed disclaimers to retain your intellectual property after your old lady bought the farm. She got 12 and the synagogue was a holdout, John explained. So she made a video titled with the name of the synagogue, your name, and the name of the poem, Mike said. #City on YouTube. Yeah, she couldn't reprint anything legally, but she could read your poem aloud, John explained. And since the synagogue wouldn't give up the right to associate with your name, they couldn't shake her. John tapped the bar counter. She even mentioned it was uncircumcised, Mike said. In the details below, John said. Persephone wasn't taking any more shit, Ethel said. You gotta admit your old lady was batshit crazy, jumping from one religion to the other. The woman wasn't even Jewish. In his cardboard box, Ernest Hemingway eased up next to Keith. I know what you were thinking. You thought she was probably a little crazy, and it was all right if she was. It was an adventure, Keith said softly. Keith, the people at the synagogue didn't have any plans other than to bury your identity, Ethel said. Your work would never be published again. Yeah, Michael Soule said. That sucked. And the manuscripts have disappeared, Ethel said. Your notebooks also disappeared, Mike said. What did your old lady do with them? Ernest Hemingway asked. Keith was silent.